Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It is 9:30 and the Darlington Local Plan Examination Hearing Session is open. I'm William Fieldhouse, the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Darlington Local Plan. So this session, like all the others, will form a structured discussion of the matter set out the agenda, which was published some time ago. Before we do that, I'll just go through some very brief introductory comments. But first of all, just allow everyone, please, who are participating today to introduce themselves. If I could start with the council, David Hand.
Good morning, sir. David Hand, Head of Planning Policy, Economic Strategy and Environment. Just to let you know that Jochen Verus is not with us at the moment, but he is joining us. He's got a conflicting meeting, but he's only needed for one of the later items, but he will join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. David Nelson.
Morning, sir. David Nelson, Principal Planning Policy Officer representing Darlington Borough Council.
And Matthew Usher.
Good morning, sir. Matthew Usher, Planning Officer from Darlington Borough Council.
Andrew Casey.
Good morning, sir. Andy Casey, Head of Highway Network Management at Darlington Borough Council.
And Steve Pickard and/or Paul Gray from Sistra.
Morning, sir. Steve Pickard, supporting Darlington.
Morning, sir. Paul Gray, supporting Darlington. I still don't have a camera, though. Sorry about that.
Don't worry, that's fine. Okay, so anyone else representing the council this morning? Jochen Verus is expected to join us later, but anyone else?
Nobody else, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, Mark Kilcran, sorry.
Hello, sir. Mark Kilcran, local resident in Darlington.
And Ken Madison.
Good morning, sir. It's Ken Madison, another local resident from Darlington.
And Judith Murray.
Good morning, sir. Judith Murray for Winfield Residents Association.
Morning. James Seabury.
Good morning, sir. James Seabury representing the Banks Group.
And Richard Newsom.
Morning, sir. Richard Newsom from Bellway Homes North East.
Morning. I think this is your first participation, isn't it? So
I am standing in for James Hall, who would normally be here, but he has another appointment that he has to attend to, so I'm covering for him.
That's fine. Apologies, I haven't gone through any sort of lengthy opening introductions, but hopefully you'll.
I have been watching online, so I'm aware. That's fine, sir.
Okay, thank you. Tom Baker.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Baker of Savills, representing Story Homes.
And Martin Bonner.
Good morning, sir. Martin Bonner, Savills, representing Helen's Land and Homes England.
And Steve Joby.
Good morning, sir. Steve Joby. I'm a director at SHA Transport Consultants, representing Helen's Land and Homes England regarding the Greater Favourdale allocation. Thank you.
Okay. Neil Westwick.
Good morning, sir. Neil Westwick, representing Skirning Estates Limited and Teesside National Airport. Sir, I'm joined today by Paul Irwin of 4, who is our highway consultant. Okay, thank you. Do you want to just introduce yourself briefly, Mr. Irwin?
Thanks, Paul Irwin, 4 Consulting, representing Skirning Estates Limited.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Joanne Harding.
Thank you. Yes, Joanne Harding. I'm from the Home Builders Federation. Thank you.
Councillor Snedker.
Good morning. Matthew Snedker, representing Darlington Green Party, and if the schedule doesn't change, this will be the last session I'm joining today.
We're all nearing the end for the moment anyway, so yeah. Joe Ellis.
Thank you, sir. Joe Ellis, Blue Kayak Planning, representing Darlington Green Party.
And Richard Cohen.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Cohen.
CPRE and Bishop Auckland Cycling Club, we do quite frequently cycle through Darlington.
Okay, thank you. Right, any other participants or people there hoping to participate today that I haven't introduced or haven't introduced themselves? No, okay, thank you for that. Right, well, we've got this morning to cover the items on the agenda, which are mainly about transport, but also some other infrastructure issues later on. We've got up till about 1 o'clock, so hopefully that will be adequate time to deal with these. We'll have an adjournment probably around about 11 o'clock. Okay, I don't think there's any procedural issues, just a couple of things I suppose to mention. There were under one of the discussions about some of the sites earlier in the week, the council offered to publish some maps of the bus network, the bus routes in the borough, and the cycle network. And those have been published 2 or 3 days ago, I think, a couple of days ago anyway. So they've been available, and if people need to refer to those today, they can. There's just one other thing. Christine Fenwick was supposed to participate on the Skirningham issue last week and wasn't able to do so effectively because he had IT problems. So he subsequently just tabled one point or one question that she sent in writing to the programme officer, which the council has responded to. That is about the potential road mitigation or the use of roads in relation as an alternative to some of the proposals in the plan. Anyway, the council has published a short response to that as DBC 15, I think. So I won't have any questions about that. I just thought I'd make that people know that's there, and obviously she's had a chance to raise that, and it's been responded to. Okay, so unless there are any procedural questions before we start from anyone, no, I will turn to the first issue, which actually I'm going to just break down into 3 parts, if I could. So the first bullet point on the agenda was the delivering a sustainable transport network, which is essentially about policy IN1. The 3 main parts to that I just want to talk about. One is the proposed orbital route, which was not explicit in the plan as submitted. It was indicated diagrammatically, indicatively on the key diagram, where it was described, I think, as a new road and public transport links, as a sort of orbital route around the northern side of Darlington. Anyway, that's what that is proposed has been clarified by the council subsequently. You'll have seen that anyway. So that's one of the issues. Secondly, there's the issue again about the Northern Link Road and what the plan says about that. There's been some modifications proposed by the council, but I just want to finish off the discussions about that this morning, I think. And then the third element under IN1 is about what the priority corridors for pedestrians and cyclists, the policy relating to those and how they're shown on the policies map. So they're the main, that's 3 parts to IN1, the first agenda item. So starting then with the orbital route, as I say, the map that was proposed, indicated on the key diagram, and the council subsequently clarified that what it would entail would be a series of new road links through allocated sites and connections to the existing road network, some of which may require improvement. That's one of the things I just wanted to clarify today. So the council's response to question 9.2 indicates the location of the 7 road schemes listed in policy IN1 part C7 and how they connect the existing road network. So that's helpful to clarify how these pieces all join up. And it suggested that collectively those proposed and existing roads are what was shown on the key diagram as the red dashed line. The council, in response to PQ82, had advised that in effect this would be an orbital route of the interconnected local link roads. And the response also went on to say that the highway modelling work carried out indicates that completing that route or those links joined up, along with other mitigation measures, would create greater choice and alleviate congestion at pinch points. The council's response to SQ13 goes on to advise that the new roads that form the orbital route would also provide opportunities for bus operators to serve the sites efficiently, as opposed to sort of cul-de-sac type layouts. So we're going to deal with the public transport accessibility and the policy IN2 relating to bus services later, but that road, the council say, would help to make that possible and those bus services more effective and efficient. So just going back first, if I could, just to look at the map that's included in your response to question 9.2. I think this is I'm directing these presumably to Mr. Casey, am I? Or Mr. Nelson?
It might be a combination of myself and Mr. Casey, if that's okay, sir.
Absolutely fine. Yeah, so that map is helpful, as I say, and it shows in red the links that we have to be built as part of the allocations, and the green links are existing roads, which I'll come on to some bits of those that I need to just clarify, or one in particular, about how those sort of join up and what would need to be improved. And it's got little reference numbers on those, N3, E20, etc., which I think go back to the IDP. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. And I think as well there the references reflected in our highway modelling report as well.
Yeah.
So we just wanted consistency there between the different evidence-based documents.
So if I looked at N1, for example, on your 9.2 map, it's then I can look in the appendix to the IDP, Appendix 3. It's got lists of schemes, doesn't it? It's broken down into different dates, and I can find that in there. And N1, I think, is listed as a junction improvement on the A167 with Bertree Lane.
Might be something Mr. Casey can clarify a bit more, but I think there's a few bits going on around there that I think there is a junction improvement, but also as part of the development of Burymead Farm, there will also be a connecting road through.
I'll get into the detail in a minute. I just wanted to clarify what the numbers were first before.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not quite as simple as just looking at the schemes in the appendix to the IDP. Is that right?
Probably not for that one. No, I think all the rest of them probably are, but I think that one, yeah, has a couple of different elements to it.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, understood. And I wanted to ask about that because I think that was the bit that was probably least clear. The link between, well, really between the end of the Skirnium Link Road, the north end or the western end, and the northern part of the Faverdale Road. It's just those bits, how they join up and what they comprise. So I'll come on to that in a minute. So, okay, that's fine. So just to be clear then, so the modification to IN1C Part 7 would now read that the provision of key routes as part of some development proposals within the plan, in conjunction with existing infrastructure or existing roads, provide additional road and public transport links to create an orbital route of the northern urban area of Darlington, and then it lists the routes. So that's explicit, and then I suppose the key diagram could be labelled to show use the same terminology, which it doesn't at the moment, I suppose would be the simple thing. I mean, just one thing about presentation. I don't think that the 7 routes listed are in any kind of geographical order, are they? It would probably help someone coming to the plan to sort of see the way they kind of go around, because I think they jump about, don't they?
They do. So.
I think on that, sir, you're right. They do. The more in data order, to be honest.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm not saying necessarily it's a soundness issue. To be honest, you've offered, I think, to put the map or a similar map that you'd responded to question 9.2 in as the reason justification. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, we've got no issue with providing that. I think also it's important to note while we're talking about these routes that almost the primary function of them is to access our development allocations, and almost the secondary functions to provide that wider travel choice as well. So I'm not sure if that's come through at the moment.
I think if you hadn't shown on the key diagram that red dashed line going around, none of this would have arisen. Probably, I probably wouldn't even have kind of picked up this issue. I mean, I think it's implicit in the traffic modelling, isn't it? I think what you say, Mr. Casey, is that connecting up those roads does have some influence on the way where people are expected to move around. So
it does. I mean, I think once you put a big red line on the plan, and it can raise some alarm bells. I think there is a thought perhaps that it's going to be a stealth bypass. It isn't. It's a series of interconnecting roads. What we wanted to do was get these development roads connected for a number of reasons, really. They do alleviate the main road networks within Darlington. So there's limited use as a through route, but you know, some of the journeys that will start in, for instance, at Coniscliffe Park, people who live in Coniscliffe Park, some then will be able to use this network of roads to access West Park Shops, which has a range of food retail. Will be able to access Wyburn School, which is one of the nearby secondary schools. If these link roads weren't in down the western side, they would actually have to go on to Carmel Road, which is a B-class road, and then through Cockerton, which is A68, which is our main pinch point on that section. And regardless of, you know, we obviously have some improvement schemes there, that will maximise the amount of capacity we'll ever get through Cockerton. You know, to get more capacity through there, we'd have to actually knock houses down and despoil the area. We're not planning on ever doing that. So this is almost, well, it provides for local trips mainly to local facilities, but there are some through movements. I mean, I think maybe to assist you, so we have actually looked at the actual through movements to see what the extent of them are, you know, to see it as a, you know, as a through road. So I've got actual a spreadsheet, a table I can send you, but just looking in isolation at the NW2, NW6, NW7, which is the western side of it. So that's Coniscliffe Park up through to the A68. What the modelling shows in 2030 when it opens, that in the morning peak, this is two-way movements. There'll be around 150 movements in total. So that's, you know, I think it's about 80 in one direction, 70 in the other. This is in the morning peak hour, and about 220 in the evening peak. Now, so that demonstrates that it's not really functioning as a, you know, any form of bypass. Some people are jumping onto the road to avoid Cockerton, and you know, the link road itself probably has a capacity of about 2,000, probably 2,000, more than 2,000 vehicles in the per hour. So it's not, you know, it's not going to be a hugely busy thoroughfare. And so it's really just to demonstrate that. With the other one that we came up with was Skirningham Link Road. They are a little bit higher there, 380 in the morning and 430 in the evening. So, but you know, in to reference that, some of the sections of the A1150 have 2,000 vehicles on them in the peak hour. So just as a contrast, really.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, I mean, if you, I mean, the proposed modification to refer to it creating an orbital route, if you're saying that misrepresents it, I'll give you the opportunity to rethink about how that's portrayed and how it's shown on the key diagram. But I think it's, well, I would say no more than that, really. We'll get views from others, and you can, you know, maybe at the end of today's session, you can have a think about whether the wording's as you want it to be, or some other slight tweak to it would help. I don't know. I suppose that I'll come on to the implications of the modelling and any further mitigation that might be needed, which we started to talk about in relation to Skirningham, you know, beyond 2036 in due course. But let's leave that for now. So just looking at it in terms of the bit that I was less clear about, you might be able to just clarify this, which you just started talking to, is when you get to the end of the Skirningham distributor road, when it joins the A167, the links then seem to go down the A167, then there's onto, then it seems to cross an allocated site, which I don't think is listed in IN1 or in the developer requirements for that site, is it?
It isn't, sir. It's a consented site, Berrymead Farm they call it, and it's we do actually have, I don't know if the section 106 is signed yet, but it's certainly agreed. So there are triggers within that deliver that link. I think it's after 150, 180 dwellings, something like that, out of a 350 dwelling site. So it will come forward fairly early. It is the one bit that's not missing, and probably to pick up on the question you maybe are about to ask, because the orbital route does show a more direct route linking onto Bertree Lane. So that plan, the main plan number 1, does show that. And basically, the simple answer to that is that route isn't required for this local plan. When you look at the traffic modelling, it talks about additional, you know, beyond 20 2035. It talks about additional strategic roads being required to deliver the rest of these large development sites, and that will be one of those roads that will be absolutely critical. I think the nature of that road, because you know, a lot of the other roads that we're developing will have direct frontage access. There will be residential access roads effectively.
Yeah.
That road will be a little bit different. That will be what I would call a highway. It will be a local strategic distributor road, because it connects the A68 via Bertree Lane with the A167, which is obviously one of our other main routes in, and will through Skirningham Link Road will have a connection to carry out that kind of east-west movement across the town. What the traffic modelling shows is that east-west movement does create some issues. I won't go into the DNLR, but you know, there's obviously an opportunity for the Darlington Northern Link Road to connect into that via a section of the Skirningham Link Road, and that will be our long-term strategy. It's obviously not for this local plan. We're not looking at the Darlington Northern Link Road as part of this local plan, but there is definitely a need for a strategic highway, 40 mile per hour probably type road, 7.3 metre wide carriageway across the northern end, but not for this local plan.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that, but just to make sure I understand what you were just talking there about. So at the moment, the link from the end of the Skirningham Link Road at the western end of it, and then the Faverdale new link road, that would use the existing road network along with a new link across the Berrymead Farm site, which has now got permission. And then I think the requirements for the Faverdale site talk about the link over the railway line, don't they? One of the requirements in the Faverdale allocation is Robert's phrase now. It says H11.G, connectivity over Bishop Line to Harrogate Hill.
Yeah.
Is that's an improvement to Bertree Lane, is it?
Well, there will be pedestrian improvements to Bertree Lane. We're also looking at, to be honest, the bridge across the Bishop Line there is quite a difficult bridge to improve for pedestrians. We can probably improve it on one side. It'll probably need some strengthening in terms of the parapets, because if you do see it, it's got safety barrier protecting it. So we will be looking for improvements there. But the main actual pedestrian route through to the existing part of the town is via Faverdale. There will be requirements for improvements to Faverdale onto the Black Path. I think that gets talked about in some of the
okay.
So Tunnypot Lane type territory.
Okay, well, I suppose I was trying to understand this link between, as I say, the Skirningham Road and the Faverdale Road, and what the bits would be. So we've got the Berrymead Farm planning permission that's not reflected in the plan, but I suppose it's a commitment. Well, I'd possibly need, I don't know, clarification of that. And then you've got this bit that's the H11, what the H11.G requirement means. I don't know what it means really. I think it's a bit vague, isn't it? But in other respects, in the short term, during the plan period, that's the link, those roads are adequate to provide the links up. That's what you're saying.
That's correct, sir. And I think the H11G really relates to the fact that there's a railway line between Faverdale and some of the other services that'll need to be accessed near a secondary school. It's likely that the sustainable links will be via head to the south there, and that's actually one of the corridors that's in the local cycle walking infrastructure plan.
Okay,
So,
we'll come back to that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got that. Okay. So, and when you were talking then about, I suppose when you said map 1, you're talking going back to the red dash line and how that might be interpreted in this part of the borough. And that seems to, and that's when you were talking about, it's not a proposal in the plan, but what that may be in the longer term would be a road across, well, the countryside to the north of those housing sites that you've talked about, to the north of Bertree Lane. Yeah.
That's correct, sir. As part of a future local plan.
Yeah, so from the A167 to the top of the Faverdale link.
That's correct.
Yeah, understood. Okay, and that would okay, that's what you describe as a proper highway that would cut through and not be an access road. It would be a distributor road type connection. Right? Right, okay, understood. Thank you. Okay, I'll come on to see if there's any comments. The local transport plan does that, I don't know what date that's from now. I mean, I have looked at it. I can't remember. Is this something that is reflected in that, or is this something that's sort of moved on since the local transport plan?
It's something that's moved on since then. So the current local transport plan's 2016 to 2026. And we're basically reviewing it at the moment. Since then, the Tees Valley Combined Authorities taken on the transport function for all 5 Tees Valley authorities. They've produced a strategic transport plan, which is in the evidence documents there.
Yeah.
And we don't need to do an LTP now, a local transport plan. What we are required to do is effectively a local delivery plan, a local action plan, to deliver some of the policies that are in the to deliver some of the policies and aspirations of the strategic plan, but also to dissolve those down to kind of local relevance. So there's 6 elements to the strategic plan. We tend to deal with the local journey side, which is more the sustainable side, but there are obviously elements in major rail and national rail, and in major highway infrastructure that we deal with as well.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. So I think that's clarified. What IN1C means and what the key diagram means and how those things work together and how it relates to the traffic modelling. Okay. So thank you for that. Well, what I'll do is I'll see if any other participants have got any comments that they wish to make about this particular element of the plan and the modification to IN1C Part 7, and what that says about the orbital link. So, Jo Ellis.
Thank you, sir. Right. So the first thing to say is we're pleased to hear the clarification with regard to the link from Faverdale to Skirningham. Obviously, there is a general issue insofar as it's not entirely clear, or at least it hasn't been made clear in all of the consultation period, where those roads are supposed to go and what they're supposed to achieve. Now, I have another query, another element of clarification is needed. The plan mentions a road from Burden Hill A150 to the B6279. Now, if you look at the map, you can kind of see where that would reasonably go. It goes in between the Darlington Eastern Transport Corridor and the road upwards to the north. What is that called in the Strategic Transport Management Report? Because I can't find it or anything that corresponds to it, and that kind of links into this sort of general failing of the Transport Management Report, insofar as it contains a package of measures which are many of which correspond to elements in the plan, but many of which do not. As we've already said, as you've already picked up on, there's that missing link from Faverdale to Skirningham, and there's this kind of apparent mismatch with regard to Burden Hill. But as well as that, there's several other roads: Central Park Link Road, Birtree Lane Link Road, Bland's Corner to A66 and A66 Junction 57, Red Hall Burden Link Road, and 3 phases of roads at Ingenium Park. And then there's a whole list of junction improvements. So we simply do not know what the traffic situation would be if you built no new roads at all and simply made some improvements to junctions. Now that's one point, but I think the main point that we would really like to make with regard to the attitude to transport management in this plan is that it essentially is based on predict and provide, and that's been fundamentally and comprehensively debunked, if I can use that word, over many years, and it's starting to filter through into governmental policy. So in a situation of climate crisis, it's no longer reasonable to say, right, we've done these assessments, we think there's going to be such and such an amount of transport, therefore we're going to build more roads to accommodate them, because that's simply planning for more emissions. Now, I've just been having a look at the regional Transport for the North draft decarbonisation strategy, and that proposes a 55% reduction in travel demand, in emissions by 2030, mostly as a consequence of modal shift and demand management. Now, obviously, this plan is going completely against that. And a lot of the comments which we've heard from the council and from Sistra this morning have been very much based on the general idea that travel demand is constant, that it can't be managed, and that the default for transport is to drive. So we've heard people from Coniscliffe will be able to use these roads to access West Park shops and schools. So once again, there's no kind of consideration that they might want to get there by any other mode, or that any other mode of transport is going to be facilitated. We've heard the assertion that there are issues to do with that east to west movement in the town does create some issues. Well, what sort of issues? How serious are they? How do we know that people travelling from east to west aren't going into the town centre and out again, or aren't going into the town, that you haven't got two lots of people, one from the east to the centre and one from the west to the centre? And if so, should we not be trying to replace those journeys with sustainable or an active transport? Again, there's this assertion that this is not going to be a stealth bypass, but then in the next breath, the council says, but they do alleviate the main roads in Darlington. So there's this kind of mismatch, if you like, between what the council say the roads are for and the justification they're giving for them. And that justification is based on massively out of date and massively damaging philosophy of predict and provide, which will simply further undermine the council's ability to meet its targets under the Climate Change Act. I should say, by the way, that TRIX, the Transport Modelling Organisation, have recently produced a report saying that rather than using their data for predict and provide, local authorities and others should be using it for decide and provide. So they should be using policy not as a consequence of traffic, but as a determinant of traffic. And that's the way we need to be going if we're going to accord with the Transport for the North decarbonisation strategy, if we're going to meet the Climate Change Committee's recommendations, and if we're going to respond adequately to the climate crisis in general.
Okay, I'll get the council to respond to those, those basic points about the predict and provide approach and traffic generation and what the situation would be in terms of congestion, journey times without the road improvements and the extent to that's been modelled in due course. But just to go back to what you were saying about I did read this in your statement about not being clear about the link between the A1150 and the B6279 at Burden Hill. But have you got the map that the council provided in its statement available or not?
Actually, I haven't, sir. Where is it?
Sorry. If you're looking at the website, it'll be in the section that's got the hearing statements. It'll be the council's hearing statement for matter 9. And it's the response to question 9.2. So I think it's on the second page of their hearing statement for matter 9.
Yeah.
So have you found it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. If you look at that map, which bit on there is the bit that you're saying is not clear? Is it what's labelled E20, which is a road through one of the allocations, or is it something else?
It's both, actually. Yes. So I think we've kind of talked about the link between Faverdale and Skirningham. Yeah. Oh, so yes. Okay. I see what you're asking now. Yeah. So it's the E20 bit that isn't clear.
Okay. Well, I think the answer will be, but it's the road that will go through the the Great Burden housing allocation that we've talked about.
Right.
That's what it looks to me. So anyway, but if that's not the case, we'll get the council to clarify. Okay, so I'll get some other contributions, then I'll come back to the council and get their responses to those, and then I'll see if there's any other issues you need to come back and pick up on again. So, Mr. Madison, please.
Yes, thank you very much, sir, and good morning. Sorry, this might be a little bit of a long-winded approach, but it's following on with your conversation, and I'd like to thank you for getting clarification and recognition of the orbital route, and I've been pushing since 2017 to ask if this is a reality or not. And it's always been suggested back to me that no, we're not putting any sort of orbital route in. It's just some link roads that we're trying to do to help the situation. So that is absolute clarification. And if I was to be honest, it's an absolute, in my simplistic terms, a no-brainer. It needs to be in. It needs to actually help the town. The town is having an increase, and I only worked this out this morning, of 35% houses, which in essence can talk about a 35% increase in infrastructure across the town to be able to cope with it. And yes, I appreciate we're just talking of roads at the moment, but that applies to all the utilities. So I think that's quite a large sort of statement to actually do. And that major upgrade and disruption, of course, unfortunately, but obviously you need that, is in the town for another 15 years. That is a major undertaking to actually go down that particular line. Going back to the orbital route, unfortunately, the town hasn't got a great track record of finishing off ring roads. We've got a 40-year sort of wait still for an inner ring road completion of a final stage. And we appreciate that's not the existing staff or people, but that's a fact. And the people of Darlington have had that for a number of years. And so therefore, one of the things that I'd like to see is, I appreciate that some of the words are in there and some of the upgrades are in there. To me, there is a definite need for timelines and, in fact, pays for width, because some clearly will be developers and some others, I think, unfortunately, could well be the taxpayer. And I think that is actually worth understanding and noting. A couple of points on the west side sort of orbital route, and Mr. Casey talked about local links and being able to serve local areas. I actually think completely the opposite. I actually think it is a bypass, and it will substantially relieve traffic in the Cockett and the A68 area and take people to the motorway in a significantly better, more efficient way. And I think that is something that needs to be thought about and delivered. I, for one, and I think it's already been identified, Mr. Casey has suggested that the Darlington Transport Plan misses out and hasn't got a number of these roads in it. And I appreciate that he said that he's updating that at the moment. But can I also say that certainly one of the links on the western side of Darlington, if not more than one link, is not in the Tees Valley Strategic Transport Plan. I haven't been through the whole of the plan to try to match it with the Darlington plan, but there are clearly some missing information there in terms of its topography, I suppose, from top to bottom. And that needs to be clarified. It needs to be embedded not only in the Darlington local plan, but the transport plan if it's needed. But if it isn't, then obviously in the Tees Valley Strategic Plan, because the inference is that it doesn't appear, it doesn't feature from a Tees Valley perspective. So I do apologise, that's a little bit long, but I just wanted to get that in.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Mr. James Seabury, please.
Thank you, sir. It was just really to highlight the modification by the council to actually define Skirningham access roads, which we recommended and we support. So it just ties in with the map in the infrastructure plan, and it just makes it clear where that road's actually going. So it's just really to highlight our support to actually define that as the way that the other routes have been defined.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Mark Gilcran.
Thank you, sir. and apologise if I speak a little bit out of turn here, but I mean, I'd just like to highlight that the elephant in the room with regards to the skirting allocation is that this plan has always been about building the Darlington Northern Link Road and infilling it with housing.
I'm going to come on to that. It's next item on the agenda, if I could.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
So just, I am going to come back to it, so thank you. Yeah. Okay. Right. Any other points or comments that people wish to make about the way the plan as modified now would sort of indicate this orbital route and the way that these essential access roads and local link roads would join up. Joe Ellis, again.
Sorry, sir. I forgot to say that the plan fails to consider the possibility that vehicular mileage may decline by itself over coming years without there being any need to manage it down. Although I think that, although obviously the policy would like us to manage it down, that could be due to an increase in home working. It could be, and it also could be due to a change in the way taxation is collected with the phasing out of fuel duty and the introduction of other measures for collecting taxation from vehicular mileage, such as a mileage tax or something of that kind. So we can't carry on putting forward a single prediction, assuming that nothing else will change and that people are just going to carry on driving in the same way and travelling and commuting in the same way as they always have done.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll come back if there's not any other contributions about the orbital road at this stage. We'll come back to the council and get a response. A couple of things really about the whole traffic modelling, the assumptions about traffic growth, what's modelled in terms of journey times, congestion, into if road improvements and mitigation wasn't provided. So that general point, if we could, and then on probably the issue about whether the link from the Berrymead farm site. Well, I mean, I suppose it's academic, really, isn't it? Given that it's a commitment, but the development requirements in that site don't refer to that. And then whether the meaning of the H11 part G is clear enough. So whether you would just want to comment on those.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, just on the Berrymead farm issue, I think, yeah, that one does have a signed 106 agreement now, and there's plans there with that link in there. So yeah, it probably is a bit of an academic discussion at this point, that one now. I suppose what I'll do, if it's okay, I'll get Mr. Pickard to come in on the specifics around our extremely detailed modelling exercises that we've done with he'll be able to explain exactly how we've considered numerous scenarios, including just forecasting forward with no mitigation, no further highway works being done. We've run scenarios based on that. So there's various things within our evidence base that show those situations. Just on Mr. Madison's point, I know that he thinks we need a facility along these lines, but you noted about the disruption that may go on for 15 years potentially. But I think with that, obviously, we'd have disruption associated with the development anyway. And I think our view is, well, almost if that can provide a transport link as well. And, I think we need to get away from just talking about them as roads, because these roads will have footpaths alongside them. They will have cycleways. They will enable further choice for bus services as well. So I think just to almost come back on some of the Green Party's assertions, if you like, that these are purely roads for use by single vehicle occupancy travel. That wouldn't necessarily be the case, that they also provide a corridor for cycling, walking, sustainable transport as well. So if it's okay, if I could bring in Mr. Pickard, I'm sure he'll explain in as much detail as you need about our modelling exercise that we've been through.
Yeah, okay. Just before, thank you, Mr. Pickard. It's not about the technicalities of the modelling, etc. That need to get into. I don't think it's. I suppose it's the basic point that you've heard the Green Party sort of express about what assumptions are made about, not providing mitigation, what sort of impacts there would be, what assumptions are made about future car use, those sort of big issues that you've got to factor in. Do you want to kind of pick up on some of those? And
yeah, okay. I'll quickly try and run through our methodology and try and not get into too much detail. So we've approached this in two stages. We've done a strategic model using the Tees Valley Combined Authority model. And what we've done is looked at the number of houses that are coming forward, and we've used the TRICS database to generate trip rates against those jobs and houses, and we have applied them to the model. And as a result, just for example, in the AM you get over 3,600 vehicle trips in 2025, 4,900 approximately in 2030, and nearly 6,000 in 2035. So we've looked at what this means in the strategic level, and then that highlighted a few issues, particularly with the east-west movement that Andy Casey has already mentioned. And we've focused on 3 microsim models, so 3 more detailed models, which better replicates how the network will operate in practice.
Kind of just so I don't, you might cover a lot of ground. I may as well sort of just for my own benefit, really. So when you say that, let's take the figure in 2035, 6,000 or nearly 6,000 that's additional trips to what would have been the case without the new homes and the new employment sites. Yeah.
That would be that's with the allocations in there.
Yeah,
the associated trips that go along.
Yes, that's additional. And that's additional to what? What's the comparable figure? It would be it's 6,000 on top of.
Well, the comparable figure would be using the national transport model, which would be the temporal growth, which is used to demonstrate how background growth would be applied, and that it doesn't equate in the same way because you apply those. You apply those increases on a link by link basis.
Okay, but in broad terms, if there's 6,000 additional trips in the borough in 2035, how many is it additional to? What is it? 20,000, 30,000 now, or whatever, or would be?
Well, the factors we would look at is we would apply a factor of additional temporal factor to each link. So it's
no, sorry to interrupt. I'm not explaining myself very well. If you say the 6,000 additional trips, it must be 6,000 additional to something. What? I'm just going to get a feel for how big an increase we're talking.
Yeah, I think I'll dig that out and I'll come back to you. I'll give you that number.
But also in this modelling about the additional trips and tempo and what it would be at background growth, to what extent does it make any assumptions about the sort of things Joe Ellis is talking about potentially people starting to use cars less for a variety of reasons? Is that factored in, or is it not? It's just a sort of a normal sort of growth of car use that's assumed.
It's the normal sort of growth of car use that's assumed. But what we've done is we've within our modelling, we've looked at where houses are going to be built and where jobs are going to be created, and we have matched those up within our model. So you don't get development on top, don't get development trips on top of development trips. So we have matched that and finessed it to make sure that we aren't double counting and that we are coming up with a robust assessment.
But it assumes people will be using cars more.
It assumes that so the TRICS database, there are surveys undertaken, and it gives you surveys that give you numbers that will be generated in relation to similar types of developments, and we have used that to generate it. So there's nothing that's constraining it in terms of sustainable measures. But we have worked with some of the developers, and they are, as part of the next stage in this process, they will be looking at producing transport assessment and travel plans. And indeed, some of those transport assessments and travel plans have been produced, and they will be building travel. They will be building those constraints into their.
Okay, understood. But it's all premised on both the additional people that are going to be here and the additional jobs that are going to be here, and the existing people that are here behaving in ways that they have done in the past in terms of using cars. Is that fair to say, just in general terms?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fair to say.
There's no assumptions about, well, people working at home more, or radically improved public transport options, or all those sort of things could actually lead to people using cars less. It's just sort of using the standard sort of tricks type approach to increase use. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Sorry, I interrupted you. So carry on where you were going.
Okay. So we've done these microsimulation models, and within those microsimulation models, we've compared various scenarios. We've looked at the Temporo scenario. We've looked at just with development scenario, and then we've looked at local plan with mitigation scenario.
Yeah.
So and they are contained within all those results. There's a lot of graphs and a lot of information within those reports, and that comparison with and without mitigation is within there. So, for example, if you look at the North Darlington Aimson model, and you look at the route in 2030 from the A1 to the A66, you've got delays of 90 minutes potentially without mitigation.
90.
And then if you apply the mitigation measures, you have a delay of 13 minutes. So it does address that congestion and delay issue by providing the mitigation that we've identified.
So a delay of 90 minutes from the A1 to the A66.
Yeah.
It's compared to what's a journey time now for that?
It's you just give me a sec. It's about 13. It's similar to what we're trying to do with the modelling is get it back to the current position in terms of mitigation. So it's about a similar kind of 15-minute delay.
Right, so your model shows that without the mitigation, if you built those houses and those employment uses, you'd get an hour and a half delay on top of a normal 15-minute journey.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds, yeah, okay. Right, and that, I mean, leaving aside the technicalities, does that sound sensible, I mean, credible to you?
Well, the issue is that you've got a very congested network in the 1150, and there are some key critical junctions within the 1150.
Yeah.
And without those mitigation schemes, it has a knock-on effect. So it gridlocks other routes that are going in and out of the town centre, and it spreads along throughout the network. So it's clear that mitigation is required to alleviate that situation.
Yeah, okay, understood. Yeah,
I think just to pick up on that, sir. I think it is credible, because what you tend to get when you get congested networks, which is pretty much where we're at now with the A1150, A167, comparatively small amounts of traffic can have a huge impact on queuing. You know, as soon as the funnel's full, the water just pours out the top of it. And that's really what we're seeing there. There's obviously a lot of development trips on that part of the network. And, you know, I don't think it'd be a surprise to anyone. Certainly wouldn't be a surprise to any of the local residents that if you did add those, you know, additional development trips, that it would be, you know, it'd be significant delay. So, yeah, I think it is credible.
Yeah, okay.
And just,
yeah.
I mean, just to pick up on the development trips and how they're worked out, it's really based on it is predict and provide, and that is the way that DFT still pushes along. Any highway schemes that we do have to meet the Green Book. They are moving towards, and the government as a whole is moving towards looking at carbon savings, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward. but these are based on existing travel patterns from existing communities. It's the best evidence we've got. I'd perhaps just mention as well, because I think there is an assumption that certainly obviously the Green Party's got a philosophical view on transport and philosophical view on development, which, you know, that's fair enough. That's their view on the world. But there is an assumption that there's going to be huge benefits from working from home, and it's something we encourage. You know, sustainable transport, something Darlington Council works really hard at. We'll probably cover that in the next question. But and you can't make decisions at the moment after the last 18 months we've had. But what we're seeing in terms of the recovery of traffic is that traffic levels around Christmas time and in November, when there were still restrictions in Darlington. I think we're at local restriction level 2 then, so we're still getting told work from home if you can. But the traffic levels then were getting back up to a level near the March 2020, the pre-pandemic level. And, you know, things like bus use, we're going to be working really hard with the bus operators to try to get people back on bus. But currently, the latest data I've got, i.e. from the last month, is that patronage levels on buses are still only at 60%, whilst I think the mileage is probably at about 90%. They're struggling for drivers, so it's not back up to the 100%. So we've had a funny year, and human nature is that, you know, people do make some changes. We're going to try and build on that as a local authority. You know, we will be working. We do work in terms of personal travel planning, where we go out to communities, where we go to new housing sites and tell them where the local buses are. Tell them that, you know, this is how you get on. This is where you can get. We try to minimise these trips, but the reality is that even by doing that, there is going to be a high proportion of people that will get in the car. I think Steve's probably got some details about travel to work from the National Travel Survey, but that indicates that 65% of people go to work in a car in Darlington, and I think it's about 3% by cycle. Now we're working hard to get that 3% up, and that will reduce to 65%, but there's a big gap there between that needs to be bridged, and really that's what the highway schemes do. They facilitate that choice, that travel choice that people make, and a lot of people choose to travel by car.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful context and clarification. So I'll go back to Mr. Pickard. If there's any further, you know, you've talked about the scenarios, about the background growth and just the development in the plan, and then the development with mitigation, and give me a good example there of the difference that makes. Sorry, so is there something further you wanted to say?
Not really. I think there was just a couple of points that we've already covered on the Burden Hill Road. That's in the modelling in 2030. The Bertree Lane link. Yeah, so in the strategic modelling, I think where the Green Party coming from, it is shown, but we've not allocated trips down that Bertree Lane link other than in the sensitivity test. So that may have caused a little bit of confusion, but it's not included in our local plan assessments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that connection would use the existing roads with the new road across one of the development sites. Okay, thank you very much.
Just just one last point, because I think it is pertinent, because there was a what if we didn't provide that mitigation, and one clear what if. I mean, you've got a statement of common ground off Highways England that agrees a joint position with ourselves and themselves, and that's based on the IDP and the schemes, particularly some schemes on their network and some schemes on our network that are close to their network. If we didn't do that, there would be an objector to the plan.
Based on the impact on the Highway England roads that they're responsible for.
That's right. I mean, the level of queue in that 90 minutes on the A167, that's queuing on the A1. You know, to get that length of queue coming into Darlington, it'll be queuing on the A1, and obviously the A66 would be badly affected. You know, it's immediately adjacent to our network.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's helpful clarification. Right, let's get some contributions. I mean, I don't want to spend too much longer on this particular issue about the modelling and things, because I've got, you know, quite a few of the things, and I've got some basic points. But I'll go to Judith Murray, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's just a quick question to Mr. Pickard. He talked about delays of up to an hour and a half on the A1150. Can you just confirm, is that just at peak periods? I'm assuming this is not all day, every day.
Okay, well, we'll come back and right, Joe Ellis, please.
Thank you, sir. OK, so the first thing to say is the DFT might not have caught up with prevailing thought with regard to predict and provide is a useful technique. What they don't, however, prescribe is that councils must work to justify new roads. So, you know, that is a choice that the council has made. Now, yesterday we heard that that better building standards weren't affordable in the context of a marginally viable plan, even the better building standards that didn't actually incur additional cost. So obviously there is a problem here in terms of priorities when the council is to prioritise more road building, but not better building standards. We have heard from the council that 60% of people go to work in a car and that gap needs to be bridged. We completely agree with that. Obviously, in line with the Transport for the North decarbonisation strategy, we would expect that gap to be bridged by fostering a greater modal shift rather than by simply assuming that that must and will continue. And the other point, two more points to make. The first is that the figures given in the transport modelling report for the number of dwellings and number of jobs are 11,810 dwellings and 9,950 jobs, which is obviously greater than 9,361 dwellings and 7,000 jobs proposed in the plan, which, as we have said, are a massive overestimate anyway. And the final point that I'd like to make is that there seems to have been no assessment whatsoever of either the costs or the both in terms of financial costs and the environmental costs and social costs of the construction of these roads. Now, the comment will be made perhaps that since the roads go through development sites, the impact of building roads is taken together with the development of building out those sites. However, that doesn't take account of either A, the situation if roads proceed development, in which case they would have an impact all of their own, or if development doesn't happen, and it doesn't take into account the impact upon new residents in terms of noise and air pollution and risk, and nor does it take into account the way in which impact upon landscape, etc., from the development will be affected by the inclusion of main roads through them. So we have a very, very sketchily drawn out proposal based on a very imperfect modelling report, and which is very, very retrograde and really well out of date for the environment in which we're working today.
OK, thank you. Understood. Councillor Snedker, please.
Thank you very much. Joe has predictably done points I was going to make, and probably far better. The only thing that she didn't include was the assumption that traffic is a fluid, an incompressible liquid, as if you say, is again proved to be a faulty assertion when it comes to transport. We know that the provision of roads generates trips as well as accommodates trips, and the predict and provide tacking road upon road to prevent any congestion leads to this assumption that all journeys will be done by car. We've heard this about the rink through Connerscliff, that it will generate trips to West Park, and they're always described as vehicles. We have vehicle movements described, the number of vehicles this road's going to take. So while we've had the assertion there will be a footpath by the side or a cycle lane by the side, the modelling is always about vehicle movements, which will then mean the road has to be built because we assume they're vehicle movements. And this fallacy of traffic has to be accommodated at all costs, and it's incompressible. When we know a new road generates trips, is again what's led us to be in that situation that we are now. So I just wanted to make the point about that fallacy of traffic being a fluid.
OK, thank you. Understood. Right. I'll just go back to the council. Any final comments you wish to make in response to what's been said. I mean, there was the query from Murray about the delays. I mean, presumably they're peak time delays.
Yeah, they are peak time delays. So yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, anything further?
I've got an answer for you on the what you're comparing it to.
Oh yeah, that'd be helpful. Just
so in 2035, the temporal growth would be 2,000 vehicle trips, as opposed to the 6,000 that we have in the model. So that's an increase of 4,000.
So your model assumes there will be growth anyway, and I've got the points that Jeff was saying. And the other comparator I was looking for, just to get a feel for what that compares to in terms of the number of trips, at the moment, or what's that additional to?
The baseline traffic. I mean, again, it depends on. You mean the overall number of trips in Darlington?
Well, I mean, you're saying there's 6,000 additional trips in Darlington, aren't you? That's across the borough. I mean, obviously they're localised, but just in broad terms, or in comparison to a relevant part of the borough, I don't know. Just to get some feel.
Well, I think it's, if you're looking at Highways England Road, then you'd be looking at 20 to 30,000 on a peak period.
So maybe perhaps I could help.
Yeah.
We don't have the figure that you've asked for, which is kind of the global amount of trips, but the detailed traffic models do have indications of how many vehicles are in the models.
Yeah.
And how and what proportion are Darlington local plan traffic. So if you look at, I mean, I'll ask Steve to confirm this because it's marine. So if you look at the Conscliffe-Aimson modelling report, table 345 shows the AM and PM peak and how many cars, light goods vehicles, heavy goods vehicles are in the model, and then it's got an allowance for Darlington local plan.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can give you those figures, but it's probably better if I sent you them and just highlighted them, if that's okay. I can give you them now.
I've made a note of the table, and I've got the document, so that's fine. I can have a look at those. But I understand the point that there's not an obvious comparator. But okay. But it's helpful to know what the temporal background growth would be, and the comparison to the figures that you referred to. Okay. Anything else that you want to say about? I mean, this was essentially about the orbital link, but the general approach to traffic modelling and assumptions about car use and things. So that's been helpful.
I would maybe just add, sir, that because the council have various statutory duties. One of our statutory duties falls to me, and that's the statutory duty for network management, highway network management. So that's set out in Part 2 of the Traffic Management Act 2004. Article 16 and 17 are probably the two most pertinent elements of it, and that basically places a requirement on all traffic authorities, all highway authorities, to maintain the expeditious movement of traffic on roads. Now, that there is a widening of that says when they talk about traffic, it's about all modes of transport, but the Act does particularly state traffic on roads. And Article 17 requires us to basically identify any future impediments to traffic flow and reduce congestion or eliminate congestion. So that's the other context that we, as a highway authority, have to look at development proposals.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to final point briefly from Mr. Madison. I'm going to move on and do one more agenda item before we have a break, if we could.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's possibly something that might actually help you. There has been talk, obviously, of the base information that's been used, which you've tried to pare out from Steve, and an increase in the base information. Now, forgive me, I would like to think that the core numbers of people that live in Darlington and their transportation, if anything, we may be able to pare that down, as Mr. Casey's already said. And I appreciate that the increase when it comes to development is quite a lot, but surely there shouldn't be an increase in the base numbers, and if anything, a possible hopeful decrease in the base numbers. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, look, I'm going to deal now with, we're still on the first agenda item and the first part of it, so I do want to move on. But the next item was just to finish off the discussion that we've already had to some extent under Skirningham about the Northern Link Road, which the council has clearly, confirmed is not a proposal in the plan and isn't needed for the development proposed in the plan. Well, not during that's expected to take place during the plan period. So to that extent, there's some modifications proposed to move references to it from relevant policies, IN1 and also H10. But there is still the issue about what further mitigation may be needed to facilitate to mitigate against impacts on the roads of the full completion of the Skirningham allocation. And that's something that's being addressed by one of my action points in terms of just providing some sort of clarity about the mechanism, how that would be considered in the future, both through a review mechanism of that allocation and the development proposed within it, and how that relates to a future review of the plan. So that's that. I suppose the question linked to that would be, well, are there other sites that equally applies to in terms of the mitigation that may be needed? So, for example, Great Burden assumes 750 outside the plan period, and the Faverdale assumes 1250, I think, outside the plan period. So is it a similar situation for those allocations or not? Is that something that you can answer?
It will be, sir. I mean, I think the MPPF, allows us not to get in necessarily have all the answers to all the problems that will be created beyond the plan period. But there will be, I think there's the allocations table has something like 16,000 houses allocated. Yeah. And obviously we've modelled 11,000, which is quite rightly, as the Green Party have pointed out, is more than the trajectory for housing. So we are already part way into that additional allocation over and above. Those sites, yeah, they would also need to be looked at. There are some solutions that we think would certainly assist, but we don't know whether they resolve all the issues. Obviously that Northern Relief Road that we talked about, and there is a large scheme for A66 Little Burden roundabout that has been designed in to some degree, but that's as a jumping off point for the Darlington Northern Link Road. But that would facilitate a lot of those trips, but we haven't looked at it in any great detail, to be honest. We've focused on 2035 modelling, 2036.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, I mean, what the mitigation may be, leaving the Northern Link Road and the justification for it and all that, and that's all part of the council's consideration. But the way that the plan can be presented, and the way that we talked about H10, it's leaving it open as to what the further mitigation may be, and being sure that there's a mechanism to sort that out. So that could equally apply to the Great Burden and the Faverdale allocations as well, in terms of that there may be further mitigation than that identified currently in the plan. I think is what you said.
Yeah, that's correct, and part of the mitigation maybe, if Miss Ellis is right, that there is change in travel patterns. I'd love to see it, to be honest. I mean, that would be music to my ears. But so that to predict, we are predicting and providing, but to predict and provide that far in advance comes with some issues as well, because I think we are certainly seeing some form of change in travel patterns. Just how big an impact that'll have, we're not too clear. Obviously, in the middle of hopefully come towards the end of a pandemic. But I think there will be other things that we can do. Hopefully, more people will be cycling, getting a bus or walking.
Okay, understood. So that's very helpful. So going back to the Northern Link Road, then. It's not a policy proposal in the plan, and I think there's still some reference to it being something that's being investigated, because that's a statement of facts. Yeah. So that it's okay. And I think I've already recommended that it be removed from the Skirningham master plan framework diagram. We'll get the council's response to that in due course. But it's the final piece I think that I'd like to just discuss is whether it should be shown on the key diagram, given the role of the key diagram, according to the MPPF, is to show the broad locations for development that's proposed in the plan. And it isn't proposed in the plan. So my recommendation would be it ought to be removed from the key diagram. I accept that it's probably helpful if you wish to retain the reference in the reason justification for IN1 as a long-term investigation. You know, I'm not concerned about that. So, Mr. Nelson, do you want to just comment on that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think we've alluded to in our response to question 9.1 that really the references to the Northern Link Road were just intended to almost be open and upfront with people that is still an option that's very much being pursued. But equally, I can see now in terms of the key diagram, yeah, that probably does pose you a bit of a problem in terms of soundness issues. That yeah, it's something that we are not proposing as part of this local plan. I mean, it may get funding sooner, it may start sooner, but we've got no certainty over that at the minute. That's for other people.
All beyond my remit. You know, my remit is purely the words in this plan and the diagrams in this plan, and just being clear about what that is. The council taking that as, you know, in partnership with others, that's, you know, that's for another day for it being considered and assessed and scrutinised. So yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Right. So I think Mr. Bonner, it doesn't surprise me Mr. Bonner's put his hand up when I mentioned about possible further mitigation at Faverdale and what the plan should or may need to say about that. So yeah, let's get a view from him.
Thank you, sir. If it's helpful, I mean, we're aligned with what Mr. Casey said in terms of the mitigation as identified in our representations reflects what's in the plan, and there's possibly additional capacity within this plan period as a result of that mitigation. So that's why the flexibility is there. So as Mr. Casey said, they're already halfway into the next plan period anyway with this modelling. Just in terms of the specifics of policy H11, there is criterion H, which talks about any other necessary infrastructure. So it identifies the delivery plan. So that's those lines we were looking at the plan earlier, but also anything else identified at the time of submitting a planning application. So that allows that flexibility for review in any case as already drafted.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's helpful to point out, and I can have a look at the wording of that and see if I think anything further is needed. And it may be that it partly depends on the way the council responds to my action points about H10 and the way that the sort of the mechanism that they're suggested to that is, and I can look at it in the round. But okay, I get the point. I don't think it's quite true to say that the modelling of up to 11,000 is halfway through. It's only modest.
I might have misheard what the actual percentage was, but I interpreted that as there may be some capacity basically on that you may be able to deliver some of what is in the next plan period may be able to come forward, and that's why it's probably important to have that ability to review it as the plan goes forward. Yeah,
I think that the total allocations and supply identified in the plan is about 16,000, as Mr. Casey said, I think, and the modelling is 11,000. So there's still quite a significant amount that could take forward on the allocations, and there's no restraint at the moment in the plans prepared in terms of those other 5,000 homes. So I think there is potentially an issue about, you know, being clear about which allocations that are expected to deliver after the plan period and are assumed to do so, and that's consistent with the modelling, what it is, whether there's sufficient safeguards in the policies there to ensure that is the timing of the infrastructure and the mitigation is coordinated with the release of the development land. So I'll take your point about what H11 already says, but I can have a think about whether there's anything further that may need to be added to that. Thank you. So James Seabury.
Thank you, sir. It's just really to highlight the discussion you just had there in terms of the removal of the references and the supporting text. We accept the background information in terms of the Northern Link Road, but ultimately it doesn't have planning permission. It's not a safeguarded route on the policies map. So in terms of the decision maker for planning applications, it doesn't have that status. So it's just to really support that kind of approach that you've set out through various questions, including our response to question 9.1.
Yeah, so just retaining it as a factual reference of investigation work going on for the longer term in the plan. That's there. Whether it's necessary as reason justification, I suppose you could quibble, but it's in the plan as submitted. I can make a judgment about that, but the council are keen to keep it there for information. Okay, thank you. Right, Matthew Snedker, please.
Thank you very much. So the only sort of way of shedding any more light on this Northern Link Road that I can think of, and whether it needs to stay in the report or not, is when I first started questioning the sheer volume of house allocations from the plan, and I'm not going to dig into that now. When I first questioned that, the explanation given to me was, well, we need this Northern Link Road, and the only way we can afford it is by this quantum of planning. And so I still think that it casts a shadow over the plan, and it has an effect on the amount of housing and where the housing is being allocated in Darlington, because there was definitely a settled thought that the only way to get the Northern Link Road was by putting a lot of houses in this part of Darlington, and that would generate the need. And so it does cast a shadow over the plan, and that was what I was initially told when I challenged the size. So I think it does help me form an opinion of why the Link Road was originally put in, and why this amount of housing is being put in that part of the town.
Okay, well, I hear what you say, but I mean, it's not what's the justification for the amount of housing that I've got before me.
I know, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, nor is it a
it's what the plan says, but not what I was told. But thank you very much.
Well, yeah, okay. Right. Unless there's anything further on that, well, let me just deal. I think since it's before 11 and we've got one more item, I just wanted to deal with under the first bullet point we were still on, which is about what's called in policy IN1 Part A2 strategic priority corridors. The council's clarified that actually what they are, and there's 6 of them, is that they're what they now would like to call key sustainable transport corridors, and the council's proposing a modification to that. They've also modified the policies map to show those, and they're on the latest version they're shown as a sort of a broken dashed line, and I think there's 6 of those, basically mostly going out from the town centre, but then there's one sort of east-west route. So do you want to just briefly explain what they are, that we can look at what the wording of the policy is clear that it's about safeguarding their routes from development which would impair their functioning for recreation or as routes for pedestrians and cyclists to access employment, school, shop. So they are essentially for walking and cycling, and therefore both recreation and for access. And the point of the policy and showing where they are is to make sure that their function is protected and enhanced. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, and they reflect the 5 or 6 routes, identified in our LC whip document. And yeah, I can't remember which representative correctly pointed out that I think we had 4 of them in and 2 weren't shown, because I think the original ones were mainly focused on sustainable transport, whereas obviously these have a sustainable transport and walking and cycling function as well. So yeah, they're now identified on there to match with that evidence-based document. So
okay, and they're a mixture of routes alongside roads, main roads, are they? But also some other corridors, is that right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, the existing ones that were already shown are primarily ones down, the main public transport routes. But for example, the new one that's going from Faverdale to Redhall, that a lot of that is along. We've talked about it quite a lot. It seems the Black Path that goes along there, which is former railway track bed.
Yeah.
But it then cuts over through a park and mixture of residential streets. That one's a lot less defined, if you like. But I think again, it's just acknowledging almost because of the severance of things like the railway line that east-west connectivity in Darlington is a bit harder to achieve. So it's a mixture. I mean, you'll see that one also goes further over and picks up the Skern Green Corridor as well as it's heading towards Horton there. So it's a bit of a mixture, but it's to tie in with those priority corridors in the LC whip.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. And then to be clear, the policies map would call them key sustainable transport corridors, and that's the phrase that would be used in policy IN1, and the policy therefore is clear what they relate to.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Right. any questions or comments about that? If not, we'll have a break, and then we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is improving access and accessibility, and that's policies IN2 and IN3. So we'll do that. Oh, Mr. Madison, sorry.
Yeah, apologies. Just one quick question, and I haven't got all of the maps in front of me, but I have spoken at some length to the council with regards to what I think will be a very, very useful link road within the town. Not necessarily linked to any development, but it's between Faverdale Black Path and Elm Tree Street, which is, from what I've picked up in your conversation, is one of the strategic routes for cycling and the likes. But there are a number of, as we all know in towns, rat runs, and the A68 needs a little bit of relief somewhere down the line, and there is a massive impact of roads, residential housing that gets significant amount of traffic and through the Wesso Road cut. And that section of road seems to be completely omitted, and I think would be extremely useful to relieve the problem. And it just doesn't feature. As I say, Black Path, Faverdale to Elm Tree Street.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, I've got a couple more contributions now, so we'll pick those up, and then if the council want to come back and respond. Councillor Snedker.
Thank you very much. Yeah, while we're just finishing off part one of this this part of the document, sort of under 10.3, where we're looking at walking and cycling in particular, and yeah. I've heard what Mr. Casey said about he'd wish nothing more than cycling and walking to increase. What the constant frustration is when we look at housing developments that have been fairly recently produced in Darlington, and their transport is basically car-based, and this plan is seeking to focus on sustainable transport. And I'm wanting to make sure that the plan is written in a way that enables us as a town to meet that objective and the aspiration of focusing on sustainable transport. Now, when it talks about sustainable transport routes and the need to build them, my concern is that they're not. This plan does not require them to be built of a reasonable standard to achieve the aims of the plan, i.e., a focus on sustainable transport. And so all I'm really suggesting is that it would be improved if it simply instructed the infrastructure to fully comply or exceed LTN 120. Currently, in the LC WIP procedures or processes which are underway in Darlington, particularly Woodland Road, while it's government funded and closely monitored, it doesn't fully comply with LTN 120. It fails on continuity because bus stops sever the route, and also it fails on comfort because it fails to be minimum width of 2 metres for all 880 metres of it. So there's a tension here between an aspiration to drive up the sustainable transport, but it doesn't speak of achieving that through being of high standard. So an insertion of fully complying or exceeding LTN 120 in section 10.3 would enable this plan to deliver on its objectives.
Okay, thank you. Richard Cohen.
So I'm going to leave my camera off on the basis that I might be heard better.
Okay. Okay.
Effectively, I just want to support what Matthew Snedker just said, because that was the point I was going to be making. We've talked about cycle lanes alongside the main routes. We really have no idea what standard these are going to be. White lines on the road as a cycle lane are just not really acceptable and don't encourage people who are new to cycling to cycle. And I think these standards, either as Matthew has mentioned, or Transport for London or similar, do need to be specified for having the standards to encourage new people unused to cycling to get on their bikes and leave their cars behind. That would be my main point, sir. And we have to consider on the existing roads as well.
Okay, thank you. Understood. So I think it's various. I'll come to Mr. Casey in 1 minute. there's various references to walking, cycling, walking, sustainable transport, both in policy IN1 and also policy IN2 and IN2, and probably elsewhere, IN4 as well. Anyway, we'll come on to some other policies, but I suppose the general point, maybe if you want to respond to what you've heard, Mr. Casey, is does between them, these different policies, do they achieve the sort of high quality sort of standard of provision that has been referred to there by Mr. Snedker and Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, thank you, sir, for inviting me back in. I would suggest not to include a reference to standards, because standards by the nature do sometimes change. The standards for everything we do, there's guidance, standards, and you could fill the whole document up with it. The reality is that those 6 corridors, it's funded through a Department of Transport program that's also supported by local money from TVCA. We won't get that money off the Department of Transport unless the team that developed the cycle in the LTN 120, which is the new standards for cycle infrastructure, unless they sign it off. So whilst I appreciate what Councillor Snedker said about the route that we're putting in, we're currently building our first phase of the LC WIP to the tune of about 1.7 million along part of Woodland Road. It's the first section out of the town along Woodland Road. That broadly, very broadly, does meet the standards. That there's always compromises in traffic. So there's there's bus stops along there. We've actually had objections from the bus operators saying they would rather have it be a bus lane. So we have compromised in favour of cycling down there, but you'll never get anything. Well, it's unlikely that I'll ever produce a scheme that meets every requirement of LTN 120. It's just the nature of taking road space away for a start and squeezing multiple modes, the needs of multiple modes in a restricted corridor. I mean, we've worked with Matthew and with Darlo Velo. Well, we've involved Darlo Velo in the development of the scheme. I think it's the best scheme we can get for cyclists in the space. And if that doesn't meet LTN 120, then some of the other routes that are really constrained, I think we'll struggle with that. I think it talks about high standards, it talks about accessibility, it talks about permeability through sites, and that's correct. And I think I would leave the actual design of the schemes to the detailed design.
Okay, I'm going to break now for an adjournment, but I suppose just to give you something just to think about while you have a break is leaving aside not reference to particular standards, because I take exactly the point you say. I suppose it's the wording within policy IN1 and possibly IN3, possibly going back to DC 1 or whatever it is, about the standard. And this is not so much about retrofitting for the priority corridors that we've talked about. This is maybe about when you've got large new housing allocations, which you've said that they will provide these segregated cycle and pedestrian routes. In I think it's whether the words in the policies IN1, IN3, or wherever else I've got the right flavour of achieving the sort of the quality that has been referred to, leaving aside, not referring to particular standards. So I'll just leave that with you. Maybe we'll come back to it after the. See what I mean? Right. OK. What we'll do now is it's just after 11. We'll adjourn until 11:20, if we could, please, and then we'll be on to the policies IN2 and IN3. Thank you. Okay, it's 11:20, so we'll resume now, please. I'm going to move on to policies IN2 and IN3 in a minute, and in particular, I want to look at the approach to the accessibility of development sites and bus services in a minute. But we're also going to look at car and cycle parking requirements under the third agenda item. But I just wanted to finish off on where we'd got to in terms of pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. Not so much retrofitting it onto existing priority corridors, because I think Mr. Casey's dealt with that, but what the plan actually says about the expectations for the quality of such infrastructure for walking and cycling on development sites. And in the break, I think I picked up 3 references. One's IN1A Part 3, which talks about permeability and connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists to make walking and cycling the first choice. And then it's been modified to remove the thing about cycle parking or cycle storage, because that's dealt with in one other place. So that's one reference. And in IN2, there's 2 references. One's in Part B, which talks about new neighbourhoods. So I guess this is development sites. Permeable, provide easily accessible, safe walking and cycling routes. It talks about where they connect to. And then Part C, all development should provide safe access to the existing cycling and walking network. So the words about sort of accessible and safe are there. I suppose it's the question, I think, that maybe the issue was being raised was sort of the issue of quality without getting into particular standards. Any quick response to that, Mr. Casey?
Yeah, certainly, sir. Thank you again. I agree. I think it is an omission. It's an omission based on the fact that the staff that work for me, I know they will ensure a high quality connection, but I agree it needs to be in the policy.
Okay, that's fine. I'll leave it for that for now. We can come back to the wording. I think those seem to be the most relevant references, but the word of some sort of reference to the sort of the quality without getting into details could possibly be there. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Right, so now let's move on to IN2, and in particular, Part D, I wanted to focus in on. I don't know, maybe other things that people wish to raise, but as submitted, the meaning of Part D wasn't totally clear. So the council's proposed modification, and this is clear. It basically says all major new development. This was something that was taken into account in choosing the allocations, but due to their scale, so the public transport accessibility in terms of proximity to bus stops and things and services was a factor that was taken into account. But because of the scale of them, this policy also has implications for both the layout of the development site and also possibly planning contributions to help subsidise bus services, at least in the short term, to encourage them to be provided, isn't it? So, and basically this links it to the 80% or more of the dwellings on a site within 400 metres walking distance of a bus stop served by a regular service, which is defined as every 30 minutes during peak hours. As I mentioned, I've got the bus maps that currently exist, and that's got indications of the current frequency of services along the main routes, well, all of the services actually, hasn't it? So we can kind of reference that. So, and then as I said, the implication of that is that if there isn't a service, isn't there a bus stop that's already there serving the development site, there may be, well, there's 2 things, I suppose. One, the layout of the roads should allow for bus stops to put in, but also for financial contributions to subsidise the bus services. So understood, it looks clearer what the policy requirement is, and obviously there's been some responses to that. First of all, there's some debate about the justification for the 400 metres, whether that is, I've seen it referenced. Taylor Wimpey point out that it goes back to a 1999 document, and more recent guidance potentially talks about a kilometre being a more reasonable distance to expect people to walk, and that it wouldn't discourage them any more than 400 metres. So any comments really about the 400 metres justifications, but also Helen's Land point about, is it just a straight 400 metres? Does it take account of things like physical barriers, and how do you factor those sort of things in to this assessment? So do you want to respond to those points?
No problem. So yeah, if I could come in initially, I see Andy's put his hand up as well, so he might add something to this as well. Yeah, the 400 metres, it does come from it's actually even older. I think it's a 1973 Department for the Environment circular, but it is a well established. Essentially, it's based around a typical 5-minute walk, and as well, I think we've got to factor in, people accessing sustainable transport. May not have the best mobility. It may be, people with small children. So it's not necessarily reasonable to expect them to walk significant distances of up to a kilometre. I'm aware there's various different standards quoted. I think there was one from January 2018 that said something between 500 and 250 metres as well. So there's all sorts of different figures that could be used as an acceptable distance. But we feel that 400 metres from the Department for Environment circular, it does still is still current, and for those reasons about people's mobility needs, if you like, in order to access bus services. And you're quite right, sir. We did factor into our site selection process. There was something in the essay there where we basically looked at the bus maps that we've provided a copy of there, checked how close the sites were. Sites that were close to a bus route with an existing bus stop scored much higher. I think there was allowance for if, say, there was a route but no stop, it probably would be relatively easy to fund through development a new bus stop to access into that development. So that was the reasoning behind that. So I suppose what we're looking at is potentially this could pick up any windfall sites as well. But again, we very much want those. If we were looking at a larger windfall site and it is limited to major development, we would want it to, be in a suitable location. And this is certainly another mechanism for us ensuring that. Andy, sorry, I don't know if you've got anything more.
Yeah, okay. I will just before you do, presumably the way that this policy is written, though, it's not just about the choice of sites, it's about the way that sites would be laid out
as well.
The infrastructure provided, wouldn't it? Because the way it's written, it says bus stop infrastructure will be sought where the sites are not currently served by regular services. So obviously, if you've got a smallish site close to a main road and there's a bus stop there, fine. But if it's a bigger site and you've got to have to walk more than 400 metres to the main road, you'd look to be getting a bus service in, and presumably the bus infrastructure to go with it.
Yeah.
The financial contribution for subsidising the service to start with, to get the behaviour installed and get it up and running whilst the development's not complete. Is that correct?
It is, yes, it is.
Okay. Right, sorry, Mr. Casey, did you want to add something?
Yeah, can I just, Des mentioned all the points really, but I'll just highlight two key points that I think that we need to consider. Obviously, there's been some representation suggesting that the 1 kilometre, that's not to bus stops, which might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but really the guidance on bus stops is more about the attractiveness to use a bus instead of jumping in a car. So that 400, people, some people can walk a kilometre and would happily walk to, I don't know, to a pub or a supermarket or wherever. But what we're talking about here is making a bus journey as attractive, or perhaps more attractive than buying a car and sitting it on your driveway and using that for every intermediate distance journey. So it's more to do with the it's trying not to make it bus use unattractive. So that's one element of it. And obviously, car journeys are very attractive. You walk out your front door, most houses have a driveway, you jump in your car, so that's what we're competing against. The other element that I think is really pertinent is the type of people who use a bus, and by type I mean kind of the age demographics. But I think the last time I checked, which was probably about 3 years ago, and certainly pre-pandemic, but there was just over 40% of the people who use the buses in Darlington, or 40% of the trips, are made by concessionary travel pass holders. So that'll be a mixture of obviously mainly elderly, and some of those elderly passengers will have mobility issues, and then also a significant proportion of people with specific disabilities that they justify. So obviously, even a 400 metre distance for anybody with a with a walk-in problem. I mean, the test that on the disability pass is, I think it's something like 70 meters. If you can walk further than 70 meters, you won't get a pass. So those pass holders, English National Concessionary Travel Scheme pass holders, they've got it on disability, that they de facto they won't be able to walk even 70 meters. So and the other thing is really that we, you know, a couple of other issues. We've got an aging population, so that's going to be, that figure ain't going to go down, that 40% figure, I would guess. And also we talked about in other sessions about lifetime homes. Well, you know, if you're a kilometre away from the nearest bus stop, that might be fine when you're 30 and you don't mind walking the kids. But when you're 70-year-old, it could actually be a barrier to accessing services. And of course, the other thing about elderly people and people with disabilities, they access services more than the able-bodied people, because they have to go to doctor's surgeries, they have to go to hospital appointments more often. So they're the only points I would make.
Yeah, it's a judgment and a balance, isn't it? I mean, ideally, to encourage people to use buses, you'd have a bus stop outside everyone's house, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, you'd flag them down and people would get on them. But on
a 5-minute frequency, Seth, you know. But, yeah.
Yeah, then you'd compete with cars, but yes, it's what's achievable and realistic. Just in terms of how you actually measure the 400 meters, and whether, I mean, it's this thing about, you know, there may be physical barriers on some sites that it means you can't actually achieve a 400 meter walk distance. How would you deal with that?
I mean, well, there shouldn't be a physical barrier, is what I would say. I mean, it's basically as you would walk. So we physically measure it from the bus stop along footways. That's so you don't almost, you need the actual detail of the road patterns before you can actually measure this. Yeah. I think the one thing that I would say in terms of how we implement the policy, this is actually a policy that we already implement. So that's the other thing perhaps to say. It's in one of our SPDs, so we do this already. And we do come across discussions that we have to have with developers, and sometimes there is compromise. So what the policy does say is should, so it's not a must. It's a should. And I think one of the suggestions, or a couple of people who've made representations have suggested that I think it's D that says about the financial contributions. I think they've suggested where appropriate, and I would be comfortable with that, because there are some situations whereby I can name a site if you wished, but there are some situations where 80% of the site isn't within 400 meters walking distance of bus stop. You know, it's within 500 meters, but those bus services are really frequent. You know, they're not half-hourly services, and also there's other things that make the site sustainable, which is a supermarket nearby, a doctor's surgery at the end of the road. So there's always a little bit of flexibility that we have to work with. And I think one of the points that I'm probably speaking on behalf of the other contributors, but one of the other points I've made is if a strict reading of that policy would mean that if it didn't, we would actually run a bus physically into that very small site and run one back out. Now, we would never do that. It just, you know, the whole aim of this policy is to get financially sustainable commercial services running through these sites for the long-term public transport needs.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, we'll see if there's any points from others. In terms of, just before I open it up though, I mean, I'll just pick up Story Home's point about what the viability assessment assumed. And I mean, he says that it only assumed £250 per bedroom contribution for transport, which would cover a range of things, including safe routes to schools, as well as the bus stop upgrades, travel plan monitoring. And that if you then had to subsidise bus services as well, this wouldn't be sufficient funding. So, I mean, have you looked at that?
Yeah, it's not an area that I looked at, so it's probably one of my planning colleagues will have to pick that up.
Okay. Mr. Nelson, did you pick up on this issue?
Yeah, assessment. I think what we in the viability assessment did assume that obviously our existing SPD has money associated with public and sustainable transport contributions, so we did apply that in the viability assessment was my recollection. So, you know, it's that could include, I can't remember the specific list of the things it was covering. Sorry, I'm just trying to grab me me planning obligations SPD here. So we've got transport. Yeah, and it applied to developments of 50 or more dwellings. I think for pump priming of new or extended local bus services. That's on page, sorry, I know you're not looking at SPDs, but yeah, page 29 of our planning obligations SPD. So we just applied, so there was a public transport contribution in there. We used the existing figures from the SPD.
Well, maybe. I mean, I've seen what Story Home sums are. I mean, they're saying the VA assumes £250 per bedroom, and that may be based on the existing SPD. But the point is, whatever that assumption doesn't seem to add up to enough to provide the various things that this policy seems to possibly require, including subsidising bus services. I think that's the point. So, does the you may not be able to respond in detail, but there's a potentially viability issue that hasn't been fully factored in, I think, is the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because there'll be some sites that, don't need to subsidise a bus service because it's already there. So it's tricky to know exactly, what proportion. So I think it was applied just across the board of the typologies. It's something we can clarify further for you if you require, certainly. I know we've got a few questions still about.
I think the other points I would just make, because I am aware of some of the ongoing discussions on these sites, that a lot of the major sites are in discussions already with bus operators. So the individual site viability assessments that they've produced, I mean, perhaps other people, some of the site proposers could come forward, but they will have factored in the public transport costs. I'm aware of at least 3 and probably significantly more that have had discussions with operators and talked about costs. And I would assume naturally that they would have factored that into their cost plans and the viability assessments for the individual sites.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, Mr. Casey. It's a useful reminder. Obviously, I've got 2 sort of sets of viability evidence. I've got the sort of the theoretical typology-based assessment, and then I've got specific information about a lot of the allocations, a lot of which have now either come forward as worked up schemes or at least supported by further technical work. I'll just bring in Mr. Baker there, but then I'll come back to the others.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I think you sort of characterised our comment in respect of viability of this particular measure correctly, so I won't go over that. Essentially, what we were saying is we've done our sums in terms of the wider sustainable transport costs associated with a typical site, and this on top would seem to go above the general assumption made within the viability work. Yeah. So it'd be good if the council could clarify that. In respect of the wider modification, I think our view is that it just seems to be a bit inflexible. Certainly, we wouldn't have any. We understand the 400-metre measure. It's used across quite a few councils in the northeast of England in terms of judging whether a bus stop is proximate to a new development site. And we don't have any objections specifically to that, as long as it was applied rather with some flexibility in planning judgment. Obviously, a site can be accessible to local services, walking distance to the nearest pub or shop or GP practice or other facility, school, for example. But it could be 450, 500 metres from a bus stop. And because of this particular metric, that site, which is proximate to a range of different services, perhaps within 200-300 metres of them, would be deemed to be inaccessible and due for a payment towards bus services. So I think it's more about how this is applied and whether there is that necessary planning judgment rather than just a hard and fast rule out coughing up the requisite amount if you're 400 plus metres from a bus stop.
Okay, well, I think Mr. Case has already kind of anticipated that and said in practice that is the approach that is taken. And his suggestion was, I think, you'd add the words where appropriate, So I've noted that, and that may address your concern, providing a bit more flexibility, that it isn't a rigid rule. It's something that's, you know, tailored to the particular circumstances of the
Indeed.
case. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank
right,
you.
let's just get some other perspectives. Right, Ken Madison, please.
Thank you, sir. It was just a real case scenario very close to me. We actually had a new site built, and it obviously was outside of the 400 metres. By the way, I do agree with that policy. I think it's fine. I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility to it, but it actually seems to me to be absolutely perfect. However, the big issue was that the site developer made a 106 agreement, and within that there was some funding made for the local bus service for 1 year. Immediately that 1 year had finished, the bus company decided it wasn't viable and finished the bus service completely. And now we are in a situation where what looked to be quite a significantly better scenario has gone completely the opposite direction. And I think I'm right in saying that I'm not sure how much control the council have over those bus services. And I think, to me, that's the big issue that needs dealing with. I think the technical issue and the infrastructure issue is fine.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. Yeah, we'll get the council to come back on that. I mean, yeah, I mean, they're privately operated at the end of the day, I think. So there's a limit to what that can be done in terms of subsidising them for a period of time. James Seabraith.
Thank you, sir. A lot of the points raised in our matter statement you've covered, and essentially our issue is that the kind of reference to the 400 metres, and it does come down to the practical application of this policy, and that includes the public transport providers, as you've just touched on. And for us, Mr. Casey sort of summarised it very well. It's all about the quality of the walk, the quality of the infrastructure on the public transport corridor, and the view of the public transport provider. We know that public transport providers don't like to have alternative services on slightly different routes. So there's quite a shift in terms of an existing public transport corridor to a slight deviation to run through a large strategic site. And I think that is the key issue with this policy clause in terms of the large sites, which inevitably cover large geographical areas. Does the council really want to reroute existing public transport corridors? And I think Mr. Casey's answered the questions no, and that's not what his expectations are. So we have suggested some alternative policy wording which references working alongside public transport providers, and it is thinking about those sort of improvements that could be made to the existing infrastructure, or the potential to reroute bus services if that's what the provider and the council want to see. So the flexibility you've discussed we support, and we think it could possibly go slightly further, but we do sort of support that. And I think in reference to the actual users of public transport, we discussed policy DC1 yesterday, and you would expect that accommodation for elderly and disabled persons would be located at the very closest point to public transport provision. So again, these large strategic sites, those areas, through good planning and design, they would have the most accessible locations of the site. You wouldn't put proposed bungalows at a site the furthest away from public transport corridor, for example. So again, sort of good placemaking and design principles would be embedded within the large strategic sites to minimise walking distances. Inevitably, those parts of the site which are maybe that on the periphery, that's the question of how you address those, and it's just whether they would be better addressed by improved infrastructure on existing routes versus new routes.
Okay, well, it is 80%, isn't it? It's not 100% of the dwellings, so it's, you know, the peripheries, maybe the bits that are the 20% that aren't. Isn't that what the policy?
Well, again, it's how it's applied. So yeah, there is some flexibility in there which we acknowledge, but it's the reference to 400 metres, and we provide the example in our statement of, obviously the council have now clarified a 30-minute service, but if, for example, you've got a 10-minute public transport frequency, which we have on the A167, for example, would a resident prefer to walk 405 metres to a 10-minute service, or 395 metres to a 30-minute service? Yeah, and it's how residents are going to use the service and how public transport providers are going to want to deliver the service.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, I think Mr. Casey was kind of acknowledging that and sort of saying, well, that's where appropriate would come in, but whether that's sufficient, we can reflect on. I understand the point entirely, yeah, that it's Yeah. Mr. Irwin.
Thank you, sir. Paul Irwin on behalf of Skirningham Estates. We did touch on this point, I think, at the Skirningham session briefly, but again, I'd just like to confirm that in respect to the Skirningham site, we have had some of those discussions with the local operators, and I think there is considerable appetite for either adapting some of the existing services and extending them into the Skirningham allocation area, or the provision of bespoke services that would sort of fit within this policy. And I think that in terms of the impact of that financially, I think the likelihood is that some of those services are, well, they will be commercially viable in time. It's just a question of pump priming the initial change because of the scale of what we're talking about in terms of the overall allocation. The fare box is extremely attractive to those operators and is likely to be self-sustaining in time.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
and
sir.
that's good to the scale of that development and the ability to lay out the roads in a way that you can make that to make that work. Understood. Yeah.
That's right. That will all be factored in as part of the master planning process and the dialogue as it progresses.
Okay. Thank you. Right, Judith Murray.
Yes, thank you, sir. Going back to what Mr. Casey said, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the hearing last week when we spoke about the Elm Tree site. And I'm assuming that the site that Mr. Casey is referring to is actually the Elm Tree site, because more than 80% of the development is outside the 400 metres walking distance of a bus stop. I appreciate what Mr. Casey said, that there's a little bit of leeway in that if for example, it's 500 metres away. But policy IN2 Part D itself specifically says that accessibility is based on 80% or more of the site being within 400 metres walking distance. There's no mention of should. It says that's what accessibility is. So does that particular paragraph need rewording to bring in the word should, if that is the intention of the council?
Okay, thank you.
Just another point I'd just like to make, if you don't mind. A planning application has gone in for the Elm Tree site, and a comment made by a transport policy officer from Darlington Borough Council has actually stated that this site is not accessible by public transport.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, any final comments from the council in response to having heard those various contributions about the flexibility in the way the policy would be applied, and whether it needs any sort of further adjustment to reflect the sort of flexibility that Mr. Casey describes? Yeah, Mr. Casey.
Yeah, just I'm trying not to get into specific sites. But just to come, I think the description that Mr. Madison made and the point that Mr. Seabury made a link really, that the last thing I want to do is provide a service that's diverted into a residential area for a limited time. Bus operators will run buses wherever you pay them to run them. That's the reality. What I want is for the existing commercial services to be supported as best we can, so the site that Mr. Seabury's talking about, I would imagine the furthest extent to the housing's about 600 metres away. I think there's a 10-minute bus service connecting, to south. It's the service. It will be the service 5, I think, or 7, service 7, connecting up to Newton Aycliffe with the huge job opportunities and connecting into the Darlington town centre. Now that, for me, is a sustainable site. The 400 metres, as I said, the policy says should. We may need to look at some of the nuances around that. But for me, I would not be looking to divert a bus. It wouldn't be easy to do in any case. I wouldn't be looking to divert a commercial service into there because it would never be commercial. I think these kind of smaller sites, the medium-sized sites, are the ones that are most difficult in some respects.
Yeah.
The larger sites, the likes of Bertree, Garden Village, and the rest of Skirningham, is fairly straightforward because you can build into the network. But there's always a judgment call about, would you put a bus service into something that's 70% of it's within 400 metres, which is probably, I would imagine, is what Mr. Seabury's site is like, and we wouldn't. So that's that. I think I just will pick up on the point on specifically on Elm Tree Farm. When we would respond back to it is a policy. It's a policy in the local plan. So when we go through a development management process, we will make members aware that it doesn't fully meet that policy, but then we will propose the additional mitigation, which is, the location of shops. I think there's shops within about 600 metres of the site. There's a doctor's surgery within 300 metres, and also mention the frequency of those services that are within, the 500 metres away. So, I'm firmly of the opinion that the Elm Tree farm site is sustainable, and that would be reflected ultimately in the report that goes before planning committee.
Okay, understood. Well, I tell you what, I've got your offer of adding the words where appropriate to the modified policy. I'll give it some thought as to whether any further sort of to understand the way that you're explaining that the policies would be applied and has been applied because it's based on the existing SPD. So thank you for that. It's very helpful. And if I think any further wording change is needed, obviously I'll make that clear.
Thank you.
So okay, thank you. Right, is there anything else about policies IN2? Or indeed IN3, which I don't think anybody made any significant comments about. This is about transport assessments and travel plans. Yes, sorry, Judith Murray and Matthew Smith. So Judith Murray.
Thank you, sir. I would just like to make a couple of comments in relation to policy IN2. Firstly, we just talked about the need for all these roads before the break. To accommodate new development in the plan, but policy IN2 says that development should be located to reduce the need to travel by car. Therefore, why would we be building all these roads if development is suitably located to reduce the need to travel by car? The second point I'd just like to make is with regards to Skirningham, and from Tuesday's hearing, I got the impression that there would not be a supermarket built on Skirningham, and it would be more or less local convenience stores. My point there is that in order to do a weekly shop, you're more likely to go to a supermarket. In order to access a local supermarket, you're going to have to travel, or you're more than likely going to travel by car to get to that supermarket. And that was just a point that I'd like to raise. So that's all I've got to say about policy IN2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Matthew Snecker.
Thank you very much. I believe we're on IN3, are we not? Just for my records, yes. This is again looking at how the objectives of the plan to sort of prioritise and focus on sustainable travel, and how the wordings of IN3 allows the plan to achieve those. And it's really kind of a question about how these travel assessments and travel plans for these major developments work. Are they written once and then filed in a filing cabinet for perpetuity, or are they actually living documents? Would these plans be reviewed on an annual basis and assessed against the target? So would the rose-tinted glasses be taken off after year 1, year 2, year 3? And I'm certainly aware of really good practice where, say, for example, funds are escrowed by developers so that if the reality diverts too far from the travel plan over time, that money could then go into subsequent interventions to bring them back on track. So they're really a positive document that honours the agreement at the very beginning and brings the development to meet the needs of the people and meet the needs of the wider town by actually achieving the travel objectives that the travel plan makes there. Now, it could be that the council administers these travel plans and charges developer for the administration. It could be that the developer employs their own people to administer the travel plan and measure them. Either of those would be acceptable to us. And that would give the residents of these new developments and the residents around the town confidence that these travel plans are living documents that actually are going to achieve something for the future. Okay.
Well, I don't know if there's anything specific in the wording of IN3 that you think doesn't reflect that approach or does, but let's get Mr. Casey response to that. And,
there's no mention of a review process. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. Okay. So monitoring and review sort of the implementation of it.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Yeah, I think the points that Councillor Snedker raises are correct. You know, I have seen some travel plans that meet the needs of the planning application and haven't been fully acted upon. But in Darlington, we're fairly lucky in Darlington. I've got quite a large sustainable transport team. It's a backwasher. We were once well, I like to think we still are, but we were once officially a sustainable travel town, which was a travel demonstration town, which brought forward learning on things like this, about encouragement to use rather than just building something and just letting it let nature take its course. So I have a team of people that work for me, and part of that team actually go out to housing sites. I think I mentioned it earlier. They will work with the housing builders, the housing developers, and basically produce information packs for the residents to tell them where the nearest bus stop is, where you can get to on those buses, where it takes you to, the frequency that will identify walking and cycling routes, not just ones on site will tell you where you can get to the nearest shop on them. And we often work as well with the bus operators. So if we're working with a new local community like that, and there's a bus service just being put on as part of the supported service, the operators will often give them a weekly ticket for free, just to get that encouragement to use. So it is something. I think you can always do more of this. It is very revenue based, but we do actually do that. So, and in terms of employment sites, the same team work with all the major employment sites and the ones that will engage with us. Obviously, a lot of the employment sites aren't developments, and we work with the ones that not every development site that's got a travel plan in Darlington has had a travel plan as a result of the planning process. We work with all of the development sites and engage with them where we can. So we will monitor use, and we'll monitor changes in travel patterns over time. We run marketing exercises with them to encourage. We run competitions. So we have a cycling distance competition, which is really good for the employment sites. You tend to start getting these employment sites competing against each other about who walks and cycles the furthest. So we do a lot of that. I think the electronic link that I sent you, sir, for the I think it was for the cycle map, was to the Let's Go Tees Valley webpage, and that's the webpage that we use, and that collects all the marketing and publicity and encouragement side of the things. There's also a Connect Tees Valley page, which is the one that the bus provision was made. The bus map was provided on. That's provided by Stockton Council on behalf of all 5 Tees Valley authorities, and that's the hub of all the travel information. And the two are interchangeable, really. So we do a lot to try to encourage. I agree with what Councillor Snedker said, and we do ask for and get regular updates on the travel plans. And I agree that we do need to engage. I'm not too sure how it's quite difficult to manage that through the planning process, we've always found, but
yeah, I understand. That's helpful context. I mean, Mr. Nelson's got his hand up, so I'll bring him in. And I suppose the question is there anything in policy IN3 that reflects the proactive approach and monitoring approach that Andrew Casey's just described? I mean, it says travel plans must be iterative documents. Well, I'm not quite sure what that means. And the last sentence says to ensure travel plans are delivered successfully, a robust management strategy must be in place. So is that meant to be describing what Mr. Casey's just described, or not?
It is, and effectively as well, yeah, our intention of the word iterative means that it is a document that will be kept under review. So just coming back to what Councillor Snedker was looking for, that is the intention of the wording of iterative, that it's not one document that is then just parked forevermore, if you like. That the management side of things would be kept under review. So
what's a robust management strategy for a travel plan?
I suppose it's just a mechanism of ensuring that
Okay.
Yeah, so if I could pick up on that, it's really, if they work well, it's a two-way street, really. You've got the travel plans require people within the organisation. So at an employment site, they require a nominated person within the organisation through which all those travel messages will get fed and the encouragement to use. On our side, we have a team led by Janet Easley, whose job it is to go in and make sure that that they're meeting the requirements of the travel plan, because the travel plans are always really good. They always say the right things. It's making sure that they do it. So we do that. Janet's been in recently to Amazon to pick up on some issues that she wasn't happy about there. We've now ironed that out. We've quite often it's not out of negligence that these major employers don't do things. It's just out of lack of knowledge, or that the person changes. So we will drive home the requirements of the travel plan, but it'll only go so far, and you need a willing employer on the other side. And most of our sites we do. There are some troublesome ones.
Okay. Right, thank you. Well, I'll just reflect on. I understand the process you're describing. I suppose I'm just looking at the words in the policy IN3, and I'll maybe do an action point to think about whether that just needs to be checked to ensure that that's clear on that. Right, I do need to move on. It's just after 12 now. We've still got quite a bit to get through, so I'm going to move on to the parking and cycle storage sort of policies in the plan, and there's a number of elements to these. So first of all, the references to cycle storage were sort of in, I think, 2 or 3 different places, and I think the council's proposed a modification to bring those into one place so it's sort of clear, and we'll come on to those shortly. So, but there's the Tees Valley Highway Design Guide is referred to, and I've got that in the library. That's IN. It's referred to in policy IN4, and it's in the library, and it's document ST64. So I've got that. First thing about that is I couldn't see what date it is. So could someone tell me what that is? I don't think there's a date on it or in it. No.
Sorry, so I was just struggling to get my camera to come on there. My understanding of the Tees Valley Design Guide is, again, that it is a iterative document that's updated on occasion by Andy's equivalent.
There's a version in the library. What date was it? When was it produced?
I don't think it has a date on. Unless, Andy, I don't know if you can.
Well, rough. Okay, Mr. Casey. I mean,
yeah. So I'm.
No, I think. Right, do you seem
right, have you got me there, sir? Yeah.
I can hear you. You seem to have frozen on the camera. Perhaps just turn your camera off.
I'll turn the camera off, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm starting to have a few IT problems, so sorry about that.
Okay.
I don't think there is a date on it, so that's the direct answer to the direct question you asked. It is old, and we, to be honest, we're about 90% through the process of updating this. There is a draft just being produced by Middlesbrough of a latest draft. I think it'll answer some of the queries you've got, because it's all the references to NPPF rather than to the outdated PPG 13, which is no doubt one of the issues that you've maybe got with that document.
That's fine. That's good enough. I suspected it predated the NPPF, so it is quite old. Anyway, I suppose that's just factual information. So it's quite a big document. It's got a considerable amount of detail. So I'm not going to get into any of that at all. But I suppose its reference for the parking provision but not for anything else. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. What's the sort of rationale for that, though?
Yes, I think it's from where it originates, really. So it started off as a specification for how you build a road, for want of a better phrase. It had all those, as it still has. It's got all those technical details in about how deep, what a curb gully would look like, and every other detail on a highway. It was changed in many moons ago, decades ago, to start to give a bit more indication of how roads should be laid out, and it's grown from there. So there's details of cycle route provision, junction details, and car parking's in there as well. So it's a bit of a many-headed beast, but it is useful because when developers are looking to design the physical road and cycleway network and look at how many parking spaces they need, it's a catch-all for them. And it's provided, as you can appreciate, across all 5 Tees Valley authorities, which again I think is useful for house builders, so they don't have differential standards between different boroughs. We tend to have builders in either sub-regional or regional offices, so it's useful that they don't have 13 different standards to work with across the northeast. They maybe have 2 or 3, and ours being one of them. So that's the rationale for it, really. It's referenced, obviously we've got powers under the Highways Act in terms of Section 38 of the Highways Act and Section 219. So Section 38 to adopt roads, Section 219 to Section 225 for roads that aren't coming forward for adoption, the Private Street Works Code. So so a lot of the detail in that relates to those highway powers. I think the thing for local plan is more related to car park, and I think the layout and design of roads is in there as well, which is kind of tops its cap, if not fully endorsing or fully encouraging the national guidance, which is manual for streets too. So it does a few things, to be honest, sir.
Okay. Anyway, so what it is directly used for in the plan is to set the standards for car parking. And at the moment, I mean, you say it's being reviewed, and presumably the car parking standards are being reviewed as part of that. And the policy does say set out in the design guide or any successor, so that sort of picks that up. And I guess that there'll be the normal reference that we have regard to, and they'd be there as a starting point. I mean, at the moment, they're described as maximum, and that minimum levels will be agreed with the local authority. Again, I think that goes back to pre-NPPF and old NPPG days, doesn't it? So, but anyway, leaving that aside, I mean, no one's picked up any. I'm not seeing any serious challenges to the car parking standards, and I wasn't going to get into those. There may be an issue that someone wants to make. I think we dealt with to some extent about electric vehicle charging points and what that says in this policy. And if anyone wants to pick up on that, they can do. So what I was going to do was actually move on to looking at the cycle parking standards, and I'll deal with that, and then I'll come back and see if anyone else has got any comments they want to make. Before I do, then, Mr. Hand, David Hand, you've got your hand up. So did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, so just for clarification, as David Nelson mentioned earlier, it is an iterative document, which I think was originally drawn up in 2006, but the last amendment that's been published was 2018. So there's been a number of different amendments over time, but the last one was 2018. So the document that you've got in front of you, or as part of the library, will have been that document that was last updated then.
Okay. So, but say for page 68, where the car parking standards start and the reference to them being maximum provision, and I mean those references presumably haven't been updated, have they? Because they seem to reflect.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it only updated in 2009 what was felt was needed to be updated at that point.
Yeah. Okay. No, fine. Anyway, I haven't got any questions about the car parking standards. No one had really challenged them, and I didn't really want to get into looking at that. They are, as I think, so long as the policy is expressed in terms of having regard to those, and they're not seen as absolute, there's a negotiation that can be done for that. In terms of the cycling standards, though, they're the only thing that they have got, and obviously, going back to sort of sustainable travel and encouraging it, having adequate places to store bikes is in terms of what the development industry and the planning system can do, it is one of the things that can make a difference. So let's look at what the standards are for the cycle parking. In terms of for dwellings, the only thing I could see would be for flats. Is that right?
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, still getting a bit of a dwell. That's correct. That's correct. In there, there is something in one of our SPDs that places a requirement on residential properties to basically either have storage within a garage or storage within a shed. That's currently, and what we're looking to do. So there's an iteration of this coming out about now, a 2021 version, which does refer to NPPF. We're gonna have to review it straight away because there's the new LTN. Well, say new, it's about a year old now. The LTN 120 cycle design standards put forward proposals for cycle parking. So, and critically also in another part of the document about how you design cycle routes through sites. So it's going to come out and it's going to get reviewed straight away. We will be looking for some element of residential parking. So that's probably all I can say on it at this stage.
Okay, well, so for flats, it says there's nothing in the, okay, there may be something in the SPD, but that's not referenced here in the policy about cycle storage. For flats, it says 1 space per 4 dwellings for residents, 1 space for 6 for visitors, and that would be secured covered storage. So that presumably could be just a covered thing outside. It's built into the apartment block.
That's correct, sir. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And for employment, offices, general industry, and warehouses. This so talks about 2 cycles parking spaces per 200 square meters of gross floor area. So what does that mean for employees, roughly? I mean, it'll vary between them, obviously, but it must be based on some estimate of the number of spaces that are needed related to people rather than floor area.
The standard came from, the standard may well have came from PBG 13. To be honest, it's based on national standards at some point. Now they have just changed with the LTN 120. So yeah, I'm not too sure what else I can say on that, other than, you know, for per 100, you know, to compare it with the cycling as the car park provision. I think the car park provision from, I haven't got that in front of me, but I think the car park provision for a business use is something like 1 space per 30. So that would, so for every one, just doing quick maths, for every one,
wouldn't it?
Yeah. So it's, you know, going back to the 65%, you know, driving and 3% cycling. We don't really ever have any issues about capacity. I think you're focusing correctly on the right issue, sir, because car parking, safety, the security and location of cycle parking, sorry, is the #1 determinant of as to whether you can get people to actually cycle
to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And having somewhere to store your bike at home, I suppose, especially if you live in a flat, or well, even if you live in a house, I guess. But you know, it can be a barrier as well, can it not? But I mean, yeah, places
it can. Yeah, it can. So that's really, and I appreciate it's not before you, but that's really why I mentioned the SPD, because we were one of the, you know, we specifically put that in a supplementary planning document to try to ensure that, you know, there was provision at homes. Now that's proved difficult in terms of it's a viability issue that gets put back to us, so we don't always get them, but we have in a number of locations. I mean, most new developments have garages, thankfully, but the ones that don't, we have had some issue. We have had some sites, probably half of them, where we have encouraged and actually secured a shed in the back garden as part of the development. On other ones, you know, it's been one of the things that's been lost through viability.
Okay, right. The way that this is expressed in the policy, in the plan now, the IN4 would be the place that would say this, and this would say safe, secure, and appropriate provision for cycle parking and storage will be encouraged. And then it says in line with standards set out in the Tees Valley Design Guide and any successor with all new developments, including shared facilities within flats. So that's that. What, by deleting the reference in IN2, you seem to have lost a policy requirement for the provision of changing and shower facilities in employment developments. Was that deliberate, or was that just a consequence of changing it around?
Sorry, I'll just come in on that one, sir. I think the difficulty we probably had with that again, it's something that we probably couldn't insist on, and if it would, almost hinder decision making, if you like, if an employment proposal had absolutely everything else but didn't provide shower facilities, for example, will we be able to refuse that proposal? So yeah, I think it was just on reflection, and obviously we had about 3, I think, separate references to cycle parking and storage and things, just part of that rationalisation. Yeah, we didn't consider that we would necessarily be able to insist on those things, but we'll still encourage it through. I mean, I'd expect that type of thing to be picked up on transport assessments, travel plans, things like that, particularly for larger businesses.
Well, yeah, okay, I take your point. I mean, it's like any policy requirement, though, isn't it? It's you wouldn't necessarily refuse permission just because one policy requirement wasn't met, but it doesn't mean it couldn't be something that is part of a overall approach to moving to more sustainable travel. I mean, as Mr. Casey said, that one of the key things that will encourage people to cycle to places of work is if they got somewhere safe and secure to put the bike when they get there, they've got a reasonable route to get there, which we've talked about. Yeah. And presumably some people want to change and store the cycling clothes and the helmet and have a shower and stuff. So
it is something we could, look to reinstate as a modification.
Before I get on, I'm going to take contributions from Richard Cohen and Joe Ellis, and I'm sure I can anticipate some of the things they may say. But it does seem all a bit muddled list. There seems to be, I don't know, Mr. Case seems to be saying there may be some standards for cycle storage, amount of cycle storage that are in this LCN 120 thing, which I don't know what it is actually, but it's been referred to quite a few times. But anyway, I don't need to know any detail about that. I'm told there's some standard cycle parking requirements in an SPD, but again, that's not referenced in this policy. So all I've got in this policy is reference back to this very old Tees Valley Highway Design Guide that doesn't really seem to. Well, it's unclear as to what the cycling provision would be for industry and warehouses and offices. So I think some further clarification of all this approach is needed, quite honestly, just for effectiveness. Right. No, so before we finish on that, though, let's hear what Richard Cohen and Joe Ellis says. So, Mr. Cohen.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, you've picked up on what I was going to pick up on, showering facilities and its removal. Certainly this concerned me, and I would wish to support everything that you've said without repeating it, sir.
Okay, thank you.
As far as parking is concerned, sir, again, quality or design is not mentioned unless perhaps it's more covered in code, which perhaps I should have read a bit more fully. It does talk about appropriate, but that perhaps doesn't cover it. And I just wish to raise the point, sir, because there are a number of cycle parking facilities that are inadequately placed, by which I mean they could be too close up to a wall or otherwise inadequately placed. So I think design is important, getting not just safe and secure, but well designed as well and well placed. And the other thing I would like to mention, sir, is you referred to the Teesside code or guidelines that this came from. And I think if I can just go back, I was saying, why wasn't that sort of document referred to in the design of cycleways? I'll just make that point, sir. I think I mentioned it in my statement. But certainly, as far as showers, I would like to say that cyclists would very much, if they are cycling to work, they may be sweaty. They do want some sort of changing facility.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, going back to the quality of or the design of the cycle routes, we've kind of discussed that, and I know, sir. Yes. Yeah. So I think that'll be picked up rather than going back referring to a.
I don't want to go. Yeah. Yeah,
I think
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, Joe Ellis.
Thank you, sir. Right, just a couple of points, which are kind of quite quick, really. I suppose the first point to make is the discussion has been the statement has been made that yes, the Tees Valley Highway Design Guide may have first come out in 2006, but it's been reviewed at several times since then, and it will be reviewed again to accommodate the most recent advice, including LTN 120 on cycle infrastructure design. I suppose the question to ask is, would it not be easier and more positive to say cycle parking will be provided and cycle infrastructure will be provided in line with LTN 120, rather than waiting for a kind of middleman document to provide that information? The second point that I want to make, which is only tangentially on cycle parking, is that the assertion was made, I think, by Mr. Casey, that the availability of parking was the principal determinant of whether people are likely to cycle. And that there isn't actually good evidence to suggest that that's the case. While there's very good kind of literature review which has been provided by the Cycling Embassy of Great Britain, which shows that study after study after study has shown that it's that actually the principal barrier to cycling is unsafe conditions on the road or lack of good safe cycle infrastructure.
Okay, well, I think we've dealt with that, haven't we, about the cycle routes, but I think you wouldn't disagree that having a good place to put your bike when you get there is also, it may not be the main determinant, but it'd be something presumably you'd wish to encourage, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. But
Yeah,
I think
okay,
it's just
yeah.
a matter of kind of indicating priorities and showing that it needs to be kind of town-wide approach.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, I think if there's any final comments from the council, I think there's an action point here about pulling all this together. I mean, whether the plan itself should set standards for cycle storage. If not, be clear about where they will be set, and possibly what would be used in the interim, and whether the Tees Valley Design Guide standards are an interim, but that they will be replaced by, or whether the standards that are now in this LTN 120, which I say I don't know exactly what it is. I don't want to get into that now. But if that set standards, are those appropriate? I don't know. So can I leave that with the council? And I'll do an action point, but I think the various things there, and maybe you need to consider whether the actual requirement for changing and showering facilities is part of this package of things. It should also be retained in the plan as it was in the submitted version. Any final comments from Mr. Nelson or Mr. Casey on that, in response to that?
Not from me, sir, no.
Okay, thank you. Right, is there anything else on parking, about either car parking or electric vehicle charging points? I think we did discuss these under the viability assessment. But the policy, we didn't necessarily get into the merits or the adequacy of the policy in terms of what it's requiring, both for residential and non-residential. But I don't think, has anyone got anything they wish to say about that? Yeah, Joanne Harding.
Sorry, thank you. It was just a quick point in terms of what we raised in our hearing statements.
Yeah.
Just sort of setting out that obviously it's government are looking to introduce through building regs, but the building regs also set out exceptions in terms of the electrical vehicle charging, in terms of sort of practicality and costs, particularly around the energy network and communal spaces and the issues associated with that. And really, it was just highlighting that whether the council thought the policy was appropriately flexible to deal with that, either the building regs coming forward, or secondly, in terms of the exceptions that would introduce. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So two things about that, I suppose. One, will the policy get overtaken by the building regs? And two, in the interim, is it as flexible as the building regs are? Is that the point, the 2 points really about that?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that electric vehicle charging might be your thing, so you've waited very patiently on wanting to get there. So thank you for that. Yeah, Mr. Hand.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, we obviously appreciate that building regulations might overtake it, but at the time of writing the policy, the building regulations wasn't in place, and we felt there was a need for something. I think, you know, what we're asking for is a single phase 13 amp connection, which is a minimum, and I don't think that's too onerous to actually require that.
That's for the houses. It's a simple making sure there's a plug socket available and close enough to the house to put in, to plug your car in, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Where there is a parking space, so we don't require it where there's no off-street parking space.
Yeah, okay. And then for non-residential, it's over a certain size, and that's providing a charge point. Yeah.
Again, so I don't think that's over onerous for sort of large developments.
Okay. Right, and as you say, things may well move on, but this in the short term, this is something that you'll see to secure. Okay, Jo Ellis.
Sorry, sir, I didn't put my hand down before.
Oh, okay, thank you. Rightio. Okay, is there anything else on transport then of the IN policies? There's a policy IN5 on airport safety. We've been through IN1 to IN4, I think, and the relevant parts of those. I hadn't got any questions about airport safety. I know Mr. Westwick's here and he's representing Teesside International Airport, so I don't know if there's anything you wish to say. I don't think you made any representations about this, or didn't cover it in your statement. So anything you wish to say?
No, sir, we support the policy.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. That's okay. Right. So it is nearly past. Anything else? Sorry, any final comments that anybody wishes to make on the transport elements of the IN policies? No. Okay. Well, there's 3 other items on the agenda. I don't have much to say or ask about most of them, but first of all, the policies IN6 to IN8 deal with various utilities, telecommunications, broadband infrastructure. They're fairly general sort of policies. That haven't raised a lot of issue, and I haven't sort of identified any potential soundness issues. There was one issue about the ability of developers, what they can actually do in terms of the installation of utilities. They can only provide it on a commercial basis. So it's what these policies are asking for the developer to do. I don't know, Mr. Baker, whether you're suggesting that some of the policies go too far in that respect, or not, or is it just a sort of an observation?
Thank you, sir. It was more of an observation.
So I don't think so. For example, the broadband infrastructure, it doesn't seem to be asking anything of developers that they couldn't do. Whether the broadband's ultimately provided, obviously, isn't for the house builder to deliver.
I think that's the point, really. It's about, taking a horse to water, that old analogy. They can provide the ability to it, but the actual connection and the service is the responsibility of the prospective purchaser.
But the phrasing where it says that the developer is responsible for providing the broadband connectivity and ducts. So that's the phrase that's used. I mean, that's presumably meaning the bit of infrastructure for the house that then it's then available. I think. Okay, so fine. I just wanted to check there wasn't anything on that. Okay, right. I didn't have any other comments about that policy. Mr. Madison, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And in essence, there is a 35% surcharge on all of the infrastructure in the town. Now, I appreciate the house builders doing their bit, but it will most definitely rely on the utility companies to be able to provide that. And I don't know if there's any specific statement from them, or whether there's anything that could back that up, that says that will happen, or whether there is some significant lead-in phasing to be done. I understand the north part of the town has got a lot lower ability to provide power. And I think at the moment, Northern Power are actually trying to upgrade the system. But that might apply to all of the scenarios, become either gas or the likes. And I don't know if that is needed to be in the plan.
Okay, thank you. Judith Murray.
Thank you, sir. we just wanted to say that we find it disappointing that fibre optic installation for the Skirningham development has already commenced, whereas local residents have been overlooked and remain without it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Veris for the council.
Good day, sir. Here, well, we haven't met before today. In this session here, well, absolutely. Mr. Madison here certainly referred here to the infrastructure here, well, requirements here, well, for housing developments, and we put that here very clearly down in our supplementary document of the infrastructure development plan, and what is needed and which crucial here elements here which have to be here well taken forward, as they are sometimes a large scale site. The developers are pretty aware of well the shortfalls on the networks here well as it stands. We have discussed here, and the northeast or the Tees Valley is relatively simple in terms of dealing with utilities. It's Northern Power Grid for electricity, Northumbrian Water for the water facilities and sewage, and then it's the Northern Gas Network here for the gas pipelines as well. So we have consulted with them all on the local plan and the allocations and the outcomes in terms of well where there might be shortfall or where there is investment needed here well by the developers and well the utilities is very, very clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, yes, I was aware that the IDP had catalogued those different sort of types of infrastructure and obviously been based on discussion with the relevant companies. Okay, I'll move on then, if I could, to policy IN9, which is about renewable energy infrastructure. It deals with a number of different elements of it. So I just got two questions, or two. The first one is about the last part, D, isn't it, about the requirement for developments of over 300 houses to be enabled for district connection unless demonstrated not to be feasible or financially viable to do so. I suppose what just to understand what that actually means. I mean, firstly of all, are there any proposals for a district energy scheme in the borough, and is it likely in the planned period? And if not, how would that policy be applied? And if there are, how would that policy be applied, if you see what I mean? So could you try and respond to that?
Yes, sorry, sir. Sorry, my camera wouldn't come on there. So the policy itself is just seeking for major developments of over 300 to be enabled for district energy connection unless it can be demonstrated that it's not feasible or financially viable to do so. So it's just, to ensure that they can seek to try and achieve that. The council is undertaking some feasibility work to look into the potential for a district energy heating scheme that's still currently in its early stages. So there's no formal projects in place at this point in time, but that policy requirement's really there just to ensure that when that comes forward, that that the opportunities for it are considered.
What does it mean for a development of 300 houses to be enabled for district energy connection? What additional infrastructure or layout, or what are the implications for a 300 house site?
I suppose it's in terms of the infrastructure and enabling a connection to be made into a wider network. So it's through sort of the provision of piping and such, as it were, to be able to connect into a wider network.
Would this be something that the developer would have to provide on-site or off-site? Or, I mean, if you've got a site, I don't know where this potential district energy heating project may be, or how you'd link into it, but if it wasn't close to the development site, presumably it only works if it's close to the development site, does it?
It would, yes, that's correct, yes.
When you say there's feasibility work on a project, are you able to say what that is, or is it not something that can be publicly divulged?
It's primarily focusing on the town centre area, so.
Yeah. It's the high density areas, is it, that are more likely to be able to support such a sort of scheme. But so, okay, so if a project were to come forward based on the town centre, say, take Faverdale, would that have any implications for would this policy have any implication for Faverdale?
Well, it could potentially, if one were to be identified in that area as that site, as part of that site, there's potential that, a scheme could be looked at through the delivery of that site. There's nothing in place at this time, but should there be, this policy would provide the opportunity for that to be explored.
Yeah, but the district energy scheme would have to be, they are called district energy schemes, but I don't know why they're called district energy, because they tend to be more localised. But anyway, so I think that's that. But it would have to be on or adjacent to a development site for it to be able to for this policy to be effectively applied, or at least close to it.
Generally, it would. Obviously, the longer term, if wider connections were fed in and, a system was created, but generally they would be on a site to serve a site or a wider neighbourhood area. So it's generally how they tend to work.
Okay. Right. I don't know whether anyone wishes to say anything about that. I know some of the house builders raised it. Persimmon, I think. Taylor Wimpy, but okay. Well, okay. I won't say any more about that. So the other element of policy IN9 I wanted to ask about was the wind energy. It's slightly ambivalent, I think, in the sense of, on one hand, the council seem to be saying, well, the whole of the borough is potentially suitable for wind energy, because the PPG basically sets out an approach where you kind of identify areas of search or potential areas that's potentially suitable for wind energy. And I think, well, to sort of paraphrase, that if you're not within one of those areas, there's a whole load of things in the PPG that you have to comply with. But if you're in an area of research, it's a different sort of policy approach. So I think the council seem to be saying, well, we're not ruling out wind energy anywhere in the borough, and therefore on one level, the whole of the borough is an area of research. Is that right?
That's correct, sir, yes.
But notwithstanding that, if you put all the criteria in, well, I don't know. It was so then the criteria that would have to be complied with are those set out in IN9. Yeah, have they been modified? I can't remember now.
They have, sir. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I thought that, because basically they seem to bring. So one of the big policy obstacles, I suppose, for wind energy schemes that aren't in an area of research are having to demonstrate this community support, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So by introducing that requirement into your policy, in effect, you're applying the national policy that applies to areas that aren't areas of search, aren't you?
It could be that we are, sir. I mean, it wasn't our interpretation that that was the case. We had considered it to set out that that was a requirement that applied whether or not it was in an area of search. But we could be wrong on that, sir. So.
Oh, you mean the PPG? The need for community backing applies
irrespective of whether it's in an area of search. That was my interpretation. So.
Well, sorry, I hadn't bought it. I don't think that's the case, because I think the whole point was that if you have got a plan-led system and you do have areas of search identified, but I may be wrong. Maybe this is just something we just need to double check. I mean, the planners submitted didn't have that inclusion in it. So I've got to decide whether your approach in the submitted plan IN9, which basically says wind energy would be granted permission, provided that there's not an unacceptable impact, individually or cumulatively, on a whole load of criteria, which are normal sort of planning considerations for that. But you've added in the requirement for this community support, in effect. Right. Well, let's leave that as an action point and check the PPG. But I suppose the question is, if the council is wanting the whole borough to be potentially suitable, and that's what you seem to be saying, and to be positive about accommodating wind energy, provided that it doesn't cause any of these harms individually or cumulatively. He didn't say you needed to have community support, or was it just added in because you felt it was having to add it in to make it consistent with national policy? I suppose that's the question.
That's correct, sir. Yes, that was our reason for adding it in. Clearly, if that isn't the requirement, then it's something we'd be willing to, not include. But that was our reasoning for including it, was to.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, well, let's both have a look at that. As I said, my starting point is if the plan is sound as it is, and if it's consistent with national policy as it is, based on the council saying that the whole of the borough is potentially suitable, and it does in effect want to treat the whole of the borough as an area as such, that then we can deal with it on that basis. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Any other points from anyone or questions from anyone about the policy IN9? No. Right, okay. So finally on the agenda was policy IN10, which is community and social infrastructure. The council proposed some modifications in response to some of my preliminary questions about this. And this is to show its effective approach in terms of seeking planning obligations, about securing additional school capacity, protecting existing community facilities, and providing guidance on the location of new community facilities. So subject to those modifications, I assume the council is satisfied now that the policy is sound. I didn't have any further questions. Does anyone else have got anything they wish to say or ask about that? Mr. Nelson.
No, sir, just to confirm that, yeah, we're happy that the policy's sound now, and that also we've clarified the calculation. I know it was a little bit unclear, wasn't it, as to some of the formula that specified it was a minus rather than a dash or something.
And then okay, that's about the school provision.
It is, again,
yeah. I mean, I suppose one of the issues when we've discussed this Skirningham site was about the need for the schools and when they may be needed, and it depends on a number of factors, not just the number of new homes being built, but the capacity in the existing schools at the particular time and all those sort of things. So it's slightly complicated, but we need to remember that this policy is in place here. So whether, I mean, just in terms of responding to the action points, whether there's something there about some sort of reference to IN10 and now what the formula there and how that works may be part of the solution, I suppose, to dealing with that, as well as giving an indication of the expected timing of schools. Right. Okay. Any other comments or questions or points about matter 9 before we finish this morning? No. Okay. Well, as I said yesterday, we have got a session this afternoon. There isn't a great deal on the agenda, and there won't be a great deal more I will be saying. As I said yesterday, it was partly to have some flexibility that afternoon in case there was something that had arisen this week or even last week that we needed more time to do. So I don't think that's the case. And I'll say a few sort of closing words about the next steps. But as I said yesterday, the next steps really are for the council to respond to my action points. And then I'll have to review those and think back over what I've heard over the 3 weeks of hearings and seeing if there's anything else that needs to be done. So, okay, so we'll finish there. I will see some of you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And for those that aren't there this afternoon, thank you again for your contributions today and indeed for contributions at other times during the hearing sessions so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much.